The tricky thing with testosterone that we have to look at is that testosterone is good for you up to the point that it's not. A lot of the anecdotal outcomes as well really conflates bioidentical testosterone with anabolic steroids. Finding something productive and stressful that's got that nice balance that if you got out the other side of it, you'd be like, that would be meaningful. When I was going through my rehabilitation for my brain injury, if it wasn't for the testosterone, I wouldn't have gotten through it, because that was just this insurmountable period of what I would call living hell.
I was thinking about it recently, especially with dating and women, right? Because I have a lisp. It's not considered a masculine voice, right? Not that it ever affected me, because I never had like a lack of getting women, let's say. But I think if I didn't, it would affect me, definitely.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it recently because I was with a friend not long ago, and I noticed when he approached girls, he changed his voice.
Yeah.
Without thinking, though. I know it wasn't something that he had kind of pre-rehearsed, and I thought, that's interesting how we just naturally change our voice depending on who we're speaking to.
Yeah.
To make it sound, I don't know, sexier.
Yeah. And I think we also choose like how fast we speak as well, because naturally, because my brain goes very quickly, if I don't, like sometimes I'm watching something back, like, and I'm like, have I got this on like 1.25 times speed? And I'm like, nope. I'm like, shit, I'm speaking way too quick. So I have to be very conscious of like slowing my speech down. And I think if you focus on how your voice sounds, it anchors you in being aware of your speech so that you don't speak too quickly. And I think that's also important, because speaking slowly and confidently and like definitively is much more important than rushing your words out. But I definitely have a tendency, if I'm not paying attention, to like speak like a motor mouth, 100%.
Sure, I never would have picked up on that with you. I would have always thought, if I had to guess, it would just be, this is the natural Dave. But obviously, you've worked on a lot of this stuff being a speaker, right? Because I was also thinking, how much of what you say is the content coming out of your mouth versus the way that you say it in terms of building trust with the layman? Because when you're the person that you're educating, they don't have any knowledge. So how do they exactly know what you're saying is right or wrong? How much do you think starts with the way you say it?
I think it's a huge part. I think it's what gets you to the table, and I think it's what keeps people at the table. Communication is really important. And like when we were driving here, I was speaking about how like I started doing this degree and then I changed because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And the first degree I did was the first year they offered it at Curtin. It was like mass communications. So you did a bit of marketing, a bit of PR. I can't remember everything else you did, but a bit of advertising, all kind of different stuff. And you realize in terms of like not just like making sure that if you're writing something, it's grammatically correct. That's important for professionalism, but you realize how important communication is, because we make so many split-second judgments, which it's not a bad thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with judging people. You know, there's nothing wrong with judging a book by its cover, because a lot of the time the cover does reflect what's in the book. So when I was first doing music, so I was a drummer for the first 5-6 years I was doing live music. And then I got the opportunity to join a band as a vocalist. And it was with my best friend at the time, who was also a drummer. So I didn't think we'd ever be able to be in a band together. And he was like, hey, our vocalist quit. We're flying to Sydney. We were in Perth at the time, to record an album tomorrow. Can you come and record the vocals? And I was like, hell yeah. I'm like 17. I don't have anything else to do. And so we got up and we did our first show ever. And I reckon I could probably find the footage somewhere. But it was for the launch of when, so growing up, we had channel 7, 9, and 10 in Australia. And then they launched like that channel Go. Like it was when they, yeah. So for the launch of channel Go, they did a live concert at the Fremantle prison. It was sick. They put a stage into one of the old historical buildings. And it was my first show as a singer. And I had in my head that like, when I got up on stage, I was going to be this like really cool front man, like this amalgamation of all these different singers that I loved growing up. And I got up there and I like metaphorically shat myself. I was just terrified, because when you're a drummer, because of the lights, you can't see past the front of the stage. So it doesn't matter if there's 2 people or 100 people. You're just kind of like vibing with your friends on stage. You're in the pocket. It's cool. When you get up to the front of the stage, there's no barrier between you and the crowd. And it's not just the crowd. It's the girl you like, your parents, all your friends from school, a whole bunch of people who were just looking at you. And it was one of the worst live experiences as a musician I've ever had because I was just terrified. And for like the 5, 6, 7, 8 shows after that, it was the same. Like it was, and I was just like, I can't do this. Like I'm too nervous. I'm too vulnerable. It was scary. It wasn't fun. I didn't know that all the bands that I'd grown up watching had done it 1,000 times. So I wanted to quit. And the way that I decided to push through it was I decided on stage I'm going to put on a character. Because if I put on a character, kind of like if you're an actor and you're doing a play and you get up and give a performance, people aren't judging you, they're judging the character that you're playing. So I'm like, I'm going to put on this character. And the character that I put on was like, I'd wear like a bit of eyeliner on stage, like I'd dress kind of more over the top of what I'd usually wear. And that way I created this distinction between my stage persona and who I was personally. So that way I didn't feel like people were judging me, they were judging the character of my performance. So in this work, I don't put on a character now, but when I first started doing this work and giving presentations, I basically created this persona of someone who I would respect if they were speaking. So I just played up those parts of who I was. I dressed, put on a button-up shirt. I spoke very formally. And then over time, just like in music, the stage persona that I'd created for myself kind of just, I became more like him and he became more like me. And now when I speak, and for the last 3-4 years I've been doing this, I've gotten to the point where I can just authentically show up as myself and speak to you now how we spoke in the car or how we'd speak at dinner tonight, because it just naturally evolved into being one of the same thing. But when people see, like, if I'm speaking confidently in front of a camera and doing a podcast or something like this, I did live Q&As in a Facebook group 3 times a week for like 5 years. So like, I have answered so many questions off the cuff, no preparation. I've probably done multiple thousand Q&As. So this is just like getting coffee. Wow. Like there's no elevated heart rate, there's no nervousness, because it's just become the point where it's just, this is just authentic. And I think that people like authenticity when it comes through, but it takes a long time to get to the point that you can do that.
That is super interesting, because every time before a podcast, especially in person, I've got that elevated heart rate. I'm nervous now. It's going to take me time to warm up. Mm-hmm. I'm going to need to get lubricated first for the first 30 minutes.
Yeah.
With you, you're a lot easier than a lot of people, because you're just that sort of person that's so self-aware. You can read the room. You know how to make people feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. But others, where I'm interviewing them, they're a little bit more difficult to get through. Bro, it takes me 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. Because I'm a bit like stuttering, and it just comes across when I view it as that's amateur. Yeah. Whereas you've hit professional status now, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's just like in music we say, like, you need, if you practice for 1,000 hours, you'll master your craft. And I was just very conscious when I first started doing this that I didn't want to put stuff out online and put out this professionally until I'd done 1,000 hours, which is why I spent so many years, like as we were saying in the car on the way in, like I just did consultations and calls and then like Q&As in private groups on Facebook for years before I put anything out publicly, because I was like, I want to be so comfortable with what I'm putting out that, and I still, for big podcasts with people who I'm like, holy shit, like this person's, taking the time to speak to me, like this is massive. Like I'll definitely get a little bit nervous, but it's like a fractional thing compared to what it was before. But it's truly just from, it's like exposure therapy that they talk about when, there's any kind of anxiety or nervousness. It's like, if you just do it, if you do it 1,000 times, that goes away.
Wow. Man, that's a good kind of way to intro the podcast. Even though we don't have a theme or a topic today, I figured we've been speaking a lot lately about the whole, I don't know what other word to use, but this masculinity trend, or how to be a man trend. So we'll stay on that topic for now, and where we go, we go. Mm-hmm. But after being able to speak, I've focused a lot on fashion lately, like I said in the car. And one of my biggest regrets, if not the biggest regret, is having face tattoos. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, it's why I quit the podcast, because I felt that having the face tattoos for me was such a big kind of hurdle or pit stop. Just like a line that I just couldn't get over, because how you look, it's so important, bro, to the point where I know so many people that come on my YouTube channel or even inbox me and they just say, man, the face tattoos though.
Yeah.
Like it's a lot for me to get over. Like I could if I was really talented or something, but it's been so much to get over that I've just kind of given up, if you will. So if you could speak about fashion, right, not as extreme as having face tattoos, but how much does it matter and how many people out there can you see with potential and you're just like, bro, change your fashion?
Yeah, fashion's interesting because so as we were saying when we set up, like I'm so both my grandfathers were colorblind, and I don't know if that means that I got like a double color blindness or if I just got like a severe form of from one or the other. I haven't looked into it, but when I was a kid, it was when I remember distinctly those black and white checkered Vans came out, like the shoes, the slip-on Van shoes. And in the punk rock music space, that was like, that instantly just went to being like, that's the look, that's the thing. So in Perth, they were sold out like everywhere. And I found this one store in Fremantle that had a whole bunch. And I was like, wow, cool, I'm going to get like, I think they were like 60, 70 bucks at the time. And, you know, being in high school, that's a lot of money. So my dad had given me the money to get them. So I got them and I was so excited that like, I was like, I want to wear them home. And I got home and I just walk in the door and my dad's like, why are you wearing pink shoes? And I was like, what do you mean? So I bought the black and pink checkered ones because no one had bought them. That's why they had so many. And I was like, that makes everything just light bulb moment. So since then, I've only worn black. Whether that's a maladaptive trauma response, whatever, I've only ever worn black. And one of the reasons is I can't match color. But when it comes to how you dress professionally, I think there's a bit of like a dichotomy because one thing is that I think it's important to have a visual aesthetic that identifies who you are if you're trying to build a brand. If you come on one day wearing a suit and then come on another day wearing gym clothes, making a piece of content, unless you're creating a brand that's about the, you know, amalgamation of the two things, it doesn't make any sense. And people will see that as disorganized. And for people who don't know, my undergrad's in marketing. Everything that we do when we're building a personal brand online is marketing. How you speak, how you do your titles, like everything that you do when you put out shapes people's perception of who you are and what you have to offer. And again, going back to the music thing, like, so I used to run the bookings for a music venue in Leaderville in Perth called HQ, which was like a skate park that underage bands would come and play at, and they'd get like their first gigs. It was awesome. I don't know if it's still going. I hope it is. And so we'd run like 2 shows a week. So there'd be 10 bands that would come through per week. So I'd have, you know, I'd log into my email and have like 20, 30 bands being like, hey, I want to play a show, I want to play a show. And they'd all send me their demos. I didn't listen to a single demo. I based who got the show off how they worded the email they sent me. And it was based on the fact that if you didn't spell check your email and you didn't like format it in a way that was at least semi-professional, I couldn't trust the fact that you're going to rock up on time. I couldn't trust the fact that you were going to load in, because we had 15-minute load-ins between bands. So you have 15 minutes to get all your equipment off the stage and then all the next band's equipment on the stage, sound check it and start playing. That's tight. That's like, that has to be like clockwork. So we had a really good, you know, sound engineer who did that and staff who helped it run through, but, you know, bands would rock up drunk and rock up late and it would be really difficult to work with. And I very quickly found that there was a correlation between how well they worded their initial email and how well they came and actually performed on the day, not on stage, because I didn't care how good they were. This was their first show. Like, generally, if a band, and again, we weren't trying to make money, we were just trying to break even. It was a government-funded initiative. But if it's your first show, all your friends are coming, all your friends from school are coming, all your family's coming, your parents are coming. So a terrible band would pack out a room. But I was less interested in how well you performed on stage. I was more interested in how well you performed off stage. That was really important. So how you do one thing is how you do everything, and people perceive that whether you like it or not and whether they're aware of it or not. So if you're running any kind of brand, how you dress, how you groom yourself, how you communicate, everything is so important in the level of professionalism that you're trying to put across. And how you physically dress is a big factor for that. And I've got a certain way that I like to dress because I got to a point just like you. I mean, I've got tattoos, I've got a big beard, I look kind of like people say I look like a bikie in Australia. And I'm totally okay with that because, you know, I lost my hair when I was very young. I got into this space and I was like, I can play into my strengths that I have genetically and the look that I have. and create a brand for me that was based on maybe something that looked a little bit rough around the edges, maybe embodied physically traits of traditional masculinity, but also very well spoken. And I think the juxtaposition between how I word science in a way that people can understand compared with, I guess that's what I'm trying to communicate in the way that I dress and the way that I look, is that I am able to communicate very difficult, complex topics in a way that people can understand. And I think that that juxtaposition between a bit more of a edgy look or like a non-traditional medical look with a very professional, high-level medical, or not medical, but scientific discourse and what I'm talking about, I think that creates something that's memorable and something that stands out from the noise. So I think my best piece of branding advice for people, and I can only say what's worked for me, and there might be other theories that, you know, there's other approaches, and that might work for some people, but you play your strengths. And if you be authentically you and you be good at being you, people will respond well to that, because people like people. People don't like brands. People like people. And ultimately, if you're going from first interaction, cold traffic, to working with someone, conversion, whatever that is, them buying from you, them working with you, them having your service, whatever, that process going from A to B is a trust-based interaction. So the more professionally you can communicate yourself authentically, the better. But I also got to the point, as we were saying before, from when I was 5 years old to when I was 17, I had to go to a private school and wear a tie and wear a uniform that I hated, like Scotch College in Perth, like khaki button-up shirt with a red tartan tie and shorts and socks pulled up. Like every single day I put on that uniform being like, I hate this. I hate how it looks. I hate how it feels. I hate everything about it. So when I left school, I was like, I want to, ideally, in a perfect world, if the stars align and I work hard, I want to be able to go through life dressing the way that I want to dress and looking the way that I want to look. And that's what I've done, and it's worked.
I would say for people that haven't found their niche yet, is it important to stay neutral somewhat? Because although you have the beard and you've got the bikey look, I would still say the fashion is very neutral. It's all black. There's no fancy colors going out anywhere. As a framework, it's universally professional, the way that you dress. So what I was getting at was these kind of ticks or these checklists that men should have, even before they even consider opening their mouth. I just see so many men without them. It's like the car's dirty, or it's a strange car. It's not a neutral color. They've picked yellow or something. Same with the clothes. How much of this kind of nuance or stuff that people consider not important, how much do you think that's like a deal breaker for people, with women, with business?
My first car was a yellow Holden Cruise. So I can definitely attest to this, because when I got my first car, I was never into cars, which is ironic because all my analogies now are about cars. I still don't understand cars. But when I got my first car, I was like, it doesn't matter what kind of car you drive. And I am 100% sure that a whole bunch of first dates that I went on, a whole bunch of job interviews that I rocked up to, I was already disqualified just from the vehicle that I arrived in. At the time, I would have thought that was judgmental, that was this, that was that was a negative reflection on them. It wasn't. It was just the way that things work. And I think when I kind of raised the level that I consider young as I get older. So now that I'm 32, I say that 30s is young, just as a cope. But when I don't think men become adults until we're 30. I don't know anything about women, but I don't think men become adults until we're 30. So I think that when you're 18 to 30, you're just basically like an adolescent that has the rights to be able to, drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes and drive and get tattoos and do what you want to do. But there's so much maturing that happens during that period of your life. And you generally don't become aware of it until you look back on it with hindsight. And you're like, I didn't know anything when I was 25. I thought I knew everything, but I didn't know anything. So I think that's one thing that you learn as you go through life, is that the world is the way that it is. And the more you learn about, and I think a lot of people fixate on being like, oh, this sucks about the way the world works, and this sucks a bit about the way that the world works. But you got to play the game. You got to play the ball where it lands, because none of that's going to change. So I think the people who do well are people who adapt. And I think that's one of the most important skills you can have in life. And just because you don't like the way something is doesn't mean that you can avoid it necessarily. And I'd say that I spent, probably 18 to 25 in denial about that and learned the hard way and didn't really get anywhere. And it wasn't until I adapted in a way that I could still find that balance of authenticity, but also still recognize the game for what it was and play it. I was able to build a life that I genuinely enjoyed living, despite those limitations, so to speak.
It's a great answer, man. I want to take it completely 180. So we've got the people that say none of the material or the external matters. It's all just, I don't know what word they want to use. But then you've got the other side. I'm going to call it the Wes Watson syndrome. Okay, so Wes Watson syndrome to me is very flashy colors, bright Uruses and Bugattis, bright Richard Milles, designer clothes, different colors, and it's really kind of flashy and out there. And now to me, I've gone through that phase. So thank fuck none of those photos are out there on the internet, bro. But I've done it all, drove the Lambos, had the Richards, and I can't tell you how silly that was for me, bro. So if I could remove the face tattoos, I would, and get as neutral as possible, only because I ask myself now, is this productive? Is this beneficial to me? And not always, but often, when you're posting photos of your watch in a way that's very, look at this, to me, it's distasteful. And the people that enjoy looking at that sort of stuff, it's not the sort of people that I definitely don't want to be around. So do you think there's also this kind of 180 where the way that some people are showing what they have, whether they have it or not, I don't know. Do you think that is also a wrong way to go about things? So let's say I pulled up in a very neutral Mercedes wagon. It's new, it's nice, but it's not a bright yellow G-Wagon or something, Do you think anything of that? What do you think about this kind of Wes Watson syndrome, honestly?
I really like a lot of Wes's earlier content.
Yes.
And a lot of people, I think I've probably quoted Wes, and I'll always, whenever I quote anyone, I'll always make sure that I give credit when I quote people. And I'm pretty sure in every speech that I've given on masculinity, I've quoted Wes. I haven't watched or consumed much of his recent content because I've gone away from social media, but I'm aware of what you're talking about.
It's recent, by the way.
Yeah. And I think that I don't really have any judgment on people kind of going down their paths, because if that's what they're going to do, as long as they're not, causing harm to anyone else and that's what makes them happy, good for them. It's just not for me. And I'm like you. I mean, I'm very selective, and I've become more and more selective aggressively with who I give my time and energy to and who I associate with. And stuff like that to me, if you'd rocked up in some kind of excessively, Lamboed thing with a whole bunch of flashy stuff, I mean, I would have been surprised, because I'd be like, I thought this guy wasn't into that kind of stuff. But I'd also be like, cool, this is someone who I could maybe have a professional relationship with, but maybe not a personal relationship with, because they're just we wouldn't have common ground on a bunch of those things. I think that people derive fulfillment from different things. So last night, my wife and I were walking through Vienna, and we were walking past a whole bunch of the Prada and Gucci and all these really beautiful concept stores. And she was genuinely asking, I mean, because she's from a small, town in Lithuania, being like, if people have the money to be able to afford this kind of stuff, why do they spend all this money? We were looking at the price tags on the windows. These were 10,000 euro jackets, just stuff that was obscene. We were looking at this stuff, and she was like, well, why would you pay 10,000 euros for something that was made in a cheap Chinese factory when you could get a custom made, really nice, whatever you want in, to kind of fit the fashion? And I was like, because the type of people who buy this stuff are people who are buying the status that comes with the brand. And that is not an appeal to me or the people who I associate with. It's an appeal to another kind of group of people. And it's not my tribe. So I guess I would, if people are doing that and it makes them happy and they're going through life and it's going well for them, good for them. If someone's motivation to work is so that they can drive down, the Cottesloe Beach Drive, in a Lambo or whatever, and that makes them happy, cool. If that's the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning and makes you work hard and all that kind of stuff, cool. It's just not for me. So for me, the stuff that I wouldn't consider myself like overly, financially successful. I've gotten to the point where I can live comfortably and look after my family and not have to stress about bills, which is one of the greatest luxuries I've ever experienced in my life. For me, that the real successful stuff to me is being able to go to the restaurant and order the steak I want. Like that. Once I got to that point and I didn't have to worry about paying the bills, I still wear $8 shirts from Bonds in Australia, like the black t-shirts for like $8. I mean, this watch is like $60. I like that. And that's something that makes me happy. So it's kind of like an each to their, it's a long roundabout way of answering each to their own. I don't understand that stuff personally because it's not for me. And I guess because I don't understand, I try not to pass judgment on stuff that I don't understand, but it's just not for me.
It's a good answer. It makes me think, because I actually do love cars, do love watches. I love supercars, not just how they look, but how they perform, right?
Yeah.
But because of these influences, using those cars, wearing those watches, they've kind of ruined it for me in a way, because it does come across as arrogant. I can't see how it doesn't. So, for example, you drive a certain car, you have this Wes Watson syndrome, at least recently, and you say, you got to have this, or otherwise you're a loser, and it's just, I think to myself, well, you're definitely doing well, bro, but is that necessary? Is it necessary for me to put other people down just because they don't have that? Why not just drive the car without opening your mouth? Wear the watch as you're talking on screen. People can see it. If they're watch people, they'll see it. And I just feel like that is a more tasteful way about going about it. And then I obviously look into the comment section and the people that gravitate towards these people. And as time has gone on, I really don't want to be that way, So there's got to be this kind of balance where you've got the ultra lazy people who don't care about any of that stuff, and they kind of almost are a bit dirty. They don't clean their car, don't clean their room.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, very extreme, flashy, showy. In some ways, for me, wearing a certain watch now, it makes me feel more poor because now it's, look, I need to wear that watch so you know that I've got cash, which means that watch must be a big deal to you, meaning that amount of money is a big deal to you. You're not necessarily wealthy when you show like that. And then you do see it with billionaires. They just wear regular clothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess if you're like psychoanalyzing people who are doing that, is that a lot of that is looking and seeking external validation. And I guess like if some people are doing it to build a brand and it's part of, what they're doing as the character they're building to create a business and so forth. I mean, I think there's some distinction there. But in general, one of the things that tortured me when I was, I guess, coming up as an adolescent into an adult was that I was obsessed with external validation. I was obsessed with, when I was younger, like I wanted to dress in a way that I fit in with other people, and maybe it was because I didn't fit in at school, and then I wanted to fit in when I was older, but I was always unconsciously seeking the approval of people who I didn't know. And then as I got to know more people, or I got to know the people who I was wanting to seek approval from, I was like, oh, I actually don't like you guys. Like I actually just like the people close to me, and that as I've gotten older, my circle has gotten smaller. And I think that that's pretty universal as you come through. So I've really, and this is what I try to teach a lot of guys, particularly around concepts like hair loss, for example, which is that and again, I don't know anything about women, which is why I just talk about men, but your value as a man comes from your capacity and who you are and what you can do. And that has nothing to do with what other people think who you don't even know. Like people on the street walking past you, what they think and their judgment of you is the most superfluous waste of time thing to worry about, because generally, one, people are too busy thinking about themselves to even give a shit about what you look like, how you're dressing and what you're doing. So we think that everyone else is judging us. It doesn't even cross their mind. They don't care. But your value is internally derived. So, and again, this is actually something that I did learn from Wes. So that it's a bit ironic that it's the discourse that he's presenting has changed. But I really started to get better in terms of the relationship that I had with myself and the way that I carried myself when no one's around, when I started to internally validate myself. And the problem with internal validation is that it's really hard to earn internal validation. I mean, you can earn external validation from the watch or from the Bugatti or whatever people are driving. Internal validation is difficult because you are with yourself 24/7. You know exactly how many times this week you hit the snooze button. You know exactly if what you're saying you're doing online is bullshit. You know exactly how you communicate with the waiters at the restaurant. You know exactly if you litter or all these different things. And for me, it was going, how well can I keep my word to myself? I think that's really important because I went, well, what are values and attitudes and traits in someone who else, and again, this is quoting Wes, who I would respect and admire. And the stuff that I respect and admire in other men are people who apply themselves, people who build themselves, and people who are genuinely good people. And then people have different internal compasses and barometers for what that means. But for me, it's something, it's keeping your word and keeping your word to yourself and keeping your word to other people. And I think a lot of the time it's easier to keep your word to other people than it is to keep your word to yourself. So for example, like as we were saying before I flew in, like at the moment I've got brutal sciatica. Some dog attacked my puppy and I threw the dog off in a squat position. And I've already got a screwed up L5S1. I couldn't walk for like 2 weeks. And my wife, before we came here, she was like, cancel the trip. I'm like, no, 2 reasons. One, I saw Rise Against last night and that was awesome. So I really wanted to expand, but I was also like, I told Daniel I'd come here to do a podcast. And she's like, well, it would be acceptable if you cancel because you're in a lot of pain and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, it might be acceptable to him if I cancel, but it's not acceptable to me because I said I was going to do something, so I'm going to do it even if I'm in pain. It doesn't make any difference. And I still don't think she understands that. And that's okay because men and women are very different. But keeping your word's really important. And I think it's more important that you keep your word in circumstances that are not ideal because at the end of the day, if I'm in pain here or if I'm in pain at home, it's not going to make any difference. I mean, sciatica is not going to go away if I'm laying on the couch at home. So stuff like that's important. And I think that if people focus more on that than how they look to other people, then I think that they'll do a whole lot better, especially when they lay their head down at the end of the day, when that's generally when people aren't doing well because they can't sleep, because their mind's torturing them. But I also think it's important that you be well groomed, you clean your car, all that kind of stuff, because you have to have a certain level of just self-care and grooming and professionalism in terms of how you rock up and how you take care of yourself. But everything beyond that, I think you only wake up with 100 fucks that you can give in a day. And if you're giving fucks about things that don't really matter, you're not giving fucks about things that do matter.
That's a good answer. I wish more people could see this because the paradox or the shame for me is that with the Wes Watsons and Andrew Tates, part of the reason they did get so much exposure and so famous is because they do show the stuff that I wouldn't show.
Yeah.
Right? So if they didn't show that stuff, maybe more people like yourself or others wouldn't hear the good stuff. So I guess it kind of is that paradox. And I think that if you met them in person, they might be a little bit more tame as well. They just understand the formula to get famous. And I completely understand that, which is part of the reason why I never got famous, right? So I guess moving on from that is let's talk more about biology now. So we've got the external or kind of just fitting in enough with societal norms, but also being your unique self. And I think you've hit really good points there because as much as it's common sense to me, it's not common sense to a lot of these men, and you see it on a daily basis with consulting people. But I guess now I want to talk about biology and things like hormones, nutrition, health, sleep, all that good stuff, but with a kind of a unique twist to it with my questions. Sure. I got some questions you haven't heard before, right?
Sure. My dad was when he was younger, he was a reverend, and he used to give people their final blessing before they passed.
Oh, real?
And one of the things that he made me promise him when I was growing up, he was very lax with a bunch of stuff in a good way. He was very not lax with some stuff, but he was like, you can never ride a motorcycle, ever. And I was like, why? And he's like, because I've seen the aftermath. And I was like, okay. I was like, I'll make that deal.
Good advice, man. Man, too many people die on the roads in Bali every day.
Yep.
Every day, bro.
Yeah. Not a good way to go.
Nope. Where was I? Okay, so unique questions for you that you haven't heard before, at least I hope. Let's use me as a case study. Mm-hmm. I know there's plenty of guys like me. So today was the heaviest I was in years. I was 102 kilos, but if I'm having a glass of water after, I get to like 103, 104 during the day. 5'10", that's like what, 177. I don't know what body fat, but I'm taking 150 milligrams per week. And I look at natural bodybuilders, good ones, and a lot of them on their off season don't even look as large as me. So I get to myself thinking, am I taking too much testosterone? Even though I'm symptom free at 150, and I guess at 100 milligrams, my erectile quality is not as good.
Yeah.
Then I've been listening to you and Dr. Keith, who I originally really pushed back with for a few years. I thought, no way, 210 milligrams a week for most of his clients as his kind of like threshold where he really starts to see symptom resolution with TRT. It just sounded like too much to me because I'm looking through my own lens. I feel like maybe I'm taking too much testosterone to be 150 milligrams at this weight.
Yeah.
Now, if I got lean, maybe I'm 85, 90 kilos. It's still above what most naturals are able to achieve. So my question is, how many guys out there are like me? They don't necessarily have any metabolic dysfunction. Everything looks good, but they're heavy. And we know, at least historically, that heavy people don't live that long.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think that the part that people always have to come back to is that we're all mortal. It's not like all of these things are going to sacrifice our immortality. So unless we're talking about, abusing massive amounts of steroids and dying young, which I think is a huge shame. And I think a lot of people are doing a lot more damage than they think that they are because they're just not looking under the hood properly to realize what they're doing. And I think some of that's a coping mechanism. I think that some of that's a bit of denial. I also think some of it's just painful ignorance too. But the tricky thing with testosterone that we have to look at is that testosterone is good for you up to the point that it's not. And I think that a lot of the research and a lot of the anecdotal outcomes as well really conflates bioidentical testosterone with anabolic steroids. Like, I don't know about you, but how many bodybuilders do you know who've only used bioidentical testosterone?
0.
Exactly. And I think that, when we look at the research that was done on a lot of these, like if we talk about things like, we're not talking about things like Tren or Superdrol and things like this. If we talk about what people would consider the safer anabolics, things like, Primobolan, Masteron, Proviron, things like that. A lot of that research was done in the 60s and 70s. A lot of these medications are very old. I mean, Primobolan, I believe, was introduced medicinally in the early 60s. These are old medications. And there's not a lot of research on them. And I think that people really, really overestimate the benefits of these medications and underestimate the side effects of these medications. There's multiple reasons why they were removed from medical use, and performance enhancement is one of them. Also, giving a woman 100 milligrams of masked prop 3 times a week for breast cancer probably isn't the right treatment option. That's what they were doing.
I know.
And they were like, it worked. And I was like, yeah. And what else happened? And they were like, yeah, that's why we don't use it. In the studies, they go, yeah, it caused some side effects. It's like, no shit. 100 milligrams of masked prop 3 times a week for a woman is just mind blowing. So the tricky part with this is that, and this is something that that Keith has spoken about a lot, and I have a huge amount of professional and personal respect for Keith, and we used to butt heads a lot, and then now we have a great professional relationship because we found a lot of common ground and mutual respect because we both really believe in this concept of evidence-based medicine. And I am not an advocate for guys pushing testosterone through I'm not saying, okay, now you can go out and take grams of test a week as long as it's bioidentical and you'll live till you're 100. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I think that when it comes to bioidentical testosterone purely, we're looking at a compound that is beneficial up until the point that it's not. And then we have to ask and go, okay, well, what's that ceiling point? What's the point where the sweet spot is overshot? And I like to talk about what we call in science the inverse U-shaped response, which is the fancy jargon for the sweet spot, or like the Goldilocks zone. So they talk about the inverse U because it's this arc where it's basically like going too little is bad and too much is bad, and the middle ground is good. And I like to use coffee as an example. If you stay up all night, no coffee you'll probably be tired. 20 coffees, you'll probably also feel bad. But it's a very different kind of bad. So there's a sweet spot, and depending on the guy, that might be 1 to 3 or 4, depending on the tolerance. So I think that sometimes people think that point that it tips over into being detrimental is lower than it actually is. And I think that, and this is purely based on just now coaching and consulting thousands of guys on this, and that's not a bullshit flex number, it's a real legitimate number. I see a lot of guys who would benefit and do benefit both subjectively and in terms of blood work from taking an extra 20 to 30 milligrams of testosterone a week. And I think one of the most naive things that bodybuilders do, and I'm not going to name any names because I actually wouldn't know anyone to name who's pushing this nonsense, because I think it's just become this parroted, accepted norm, which is that if you blast at a level that's dangerous of a cocktail of whatever your bro at the gym told you to take, if you compensate for that by cruising at a level that's under what's optimal, then you'll offset the damage that you did, which is just not how it works. If you drink 20 beers on a Saturday and no beers for the rest of the week, you haven't offset that damage. It just doesn't make any sense. So I think one thing from the bodybuilding world, and a lot of the stuff in the bodybuilding world, which is a world that I've never been into, obviously, is one thing that's kind of seeped into the hormone optimization and hormone replacement space, depending on what people want to call it, is that you have to, for it to be testosterone replacement therapy, it has to be at this level that is on the conservative side. And when we're looking at correcting for hypogonadism, which is what I'm talking about and what a lot of my colleagues are talking about, we're wanting to optimize natural bioidentical testosterone levels. And I think for most people, and I've said this in my book, I've said it in my recent masterclass, I'll keep saying it, is that tends to be above the reference range in lab work. And I think that there's multiple ways to find where that inflection point occurs, where it starts to exert toxicity. In research, bioidentical testosterone is very well tolerated by healthy men in high doses. And I'm not saying that people should go out and take 300 and 600 milligrams a week, but those doses in literature are pretty well tolerated in the parameters that they're looking in the short term. So if something is doing harm to someone, we would typically expect that we would be able to observe some kind of symptomatic harm that would come from that. Now, the question is, if you ran something that was harmful but not acutely harmful, maybe in 10 or 20 or 30 years, then that would show up in your heart scans or whatever you're looking at, which I think is true. So it's a really tricky question. And I don't think that anyone is able to go, it's here. This is where the line is, because the line differs. And the part that I think is really important is that level of where testosterone can become harmful or where being too heavy can be harmful would differ based on how metabolically healthy you are. If we take a guy who's 40 years old and he's insulin resistant and he's drinking 20 standard drinks a week, which is, it's not uncommon that these guys are seeking testosterone optimization now that it's become mainstream. He probably wouldn't be able to tolerate a level above the reference range without receiving side effects, because why on earth would someone in his physiological state make a testosterone level akin to what you would get from 200 or 250 milligrams a week? But if you take a guy who's fit, lean, healthy, has a healthy amount of muscle mass and eats well and looks after himself well, we do see both objective and subjective benefits to optimizing that testosterone level, which can sometimes be up to, now given how low the reference range is, even double the top of the reference range, and sometimes even, again, 50% higher than that.
Wow. Okay, we'll stick to me as the case study. Do I look like I'm on more than a replacement dose?
Looks like you've been more on more of a replacement dose in the past.
Okay.
But again, I mean, the level of physique that you have is absolutely attainable from optimal testosterone levels and training for a long period of time.
That's really my only question, because I don't know how many people have the time that I do to go to the gym. You know what I mean? So I don't know how many people are actually doing what I'm doing to try and push my body to that limit. The volume, the intensity, the calorie, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But I guess if this is attainable naturally, what else are you looking at? If you're trying to take a look under the hood to me, if I'm like, man, I'm concerned that I'm maybe taking too much, but I actually have experimented with a little more. And to be fair with you, even my partner noticed this. There was better sex, better erectile quality, more morning wood.
Yeah.
Everything was good. I think I was getting a little puffier though.
Yeah.
A little bit more water. But what are you looking at if I'm like, I'm good. I got no symptoms, but I'm wondering if I could be better on a little more. Is there anything that you're looking at specifically with me?
Yeah. And just to give a bit more context to like what is naturally attainable versus what's not naturally attainable. The problem that we're looking at these days is that most men are subclinically hypogonadal. And so a physique like yours for the average guy coming up now who in his 20s has a testosterone level that the average 70-year-old has, probably not naturally attainable. But were he to have the actual testosterone levels that a healthy young man should have, that's a very different story because we could be talking a 2 to 3-fold difference in androgen levels over the course of a lifetime. And I think that's the part that's really tricky, is that what a lot of people don't understand is that a lot of men walking around these days, even if they're not clinically hypogonadal, they are pretty damn close to that. And if we have a spectrum of, hypogonadal to like, steroid jacked out of the sky, the level that men should be at, let's say at 30, maybe 20, 30 years ago, plus with good diet, exercise, nutrition, just in terms of less exposure to xenoestrogens from the modern environment, they should be here and they're like here. So that makes a big difference for how much muscle mass you can accrue over 10 years of training. So that, I think, is a very important point that people don't look at. So in terms of the question that you're asking is, I guess, so just to rephrase the question, is the question like, how do we know when or if we should push it up and by how much? So there's multiple ways, I think, to do that. And I always like to use the saying there's multiple ways to skin a cat because I think it sounds macabre and I think it's funny. But there's multiple different paths to the same destination. So one path, which I don't advocate people do because it's reckless, but it is effective, is you push the dose up to that inflection point and then you back it off. It's not that reckless, but that's one way to do it. It's like a child. You find the line with nagging your parents when they snap. Like that's how a kid finds the line. So that is one way to find the line. The difficulty that we have is that we can't see someone's androgen receptor expression. And this is one of the challenges that we have when it comes to dialing men in on TRT is going, well, why is it that you take two guys who are the same age, they're both looking after themselves, well, they're basically the same avatar of a human. And one guy, when he gets anything above the top of the reference range, he gets side effects. And then the other guy doesn't get any response to treatment until he gets to 2 times the top of the range. And we can't, in this day and age, they're talking about how certain new blood tests might be able to measure this, and I think that that's promising. We can't measure the expression of the receptors. So the problem with, or the limitation of measuring hormones in the serum is that hormones don't do anything in the serum. They only do something when they activate a receptor. So if you're playing pinball, which I don't know if they still have pinball machines, but growing up playing pinball at Time Zone, you get points when you hit the bumpers on the table. You don't get points if there's balls flying around. It doesn't do anything. Hormones are like that. So they don't do anything until they activate the receptor. So your receptor density and your receptor sensitivity is really important. And that's why when it comes to optimizing the outcomes of hormone replacement therapy, I'm very big on this idea of being like, how can we get you to live in a way, which you do, but a lot of guys don't, unfortunately, to optimize the expression of the receptors. And lo and behold, makes perfect sense given we're looking at a human organism, is that the things that optimize receptor sensitivity are the things that also optimize the production of testosterone levels, which is basically saying the body is primed to receive the androgens that it has. But there is still genetic individual variability, which we can't measure. So we have areas that we can control and areas that we can't control. So sometimes the issue is that guys don't need to take more, they need to make the dose that they're taking work better. And you can't just throw more testosterone at a metabolic dumpster fire and expect them to turn into Dwayne Johnson. It's not going to work. Some guys like to think it would work. It doesn't work. So when it comes to the blood markers that we would look at to go, someone has pushed the dose too high. And this is what we see a lot when guys come back and they go, hey, I know I was prescribed 125, 150 milligrams per week, but my personal trainer said I should take 500 milligrams a week, and this is my blood work. And we can see and go, okay, liver enzymes jack, so AST and ALT will spike even if they haven't trained for 72 hours prior.
Okay.
So that's why I really like guys to actually follow the recommendation to not train 72 hours or at least 48 hours prior to the blood test, because that way we can go, okay, well, this now should be within range or close to. So AST and ALT will spike in a unique variable way. So that's number one. Number two is that lipids will start to dysregulate. So if we have multiple blood tests of someone who's on TRT, assuming they're looking after themselves, kind of ceteris paribus, which is this fancy Latin term for all things constant. So if they hold everything constant, lipids should tend to stay about the same. I mean, they'll go like this depending on the day, but they'll stay about the same. So if all of a sudden LDL spikes and HDL tanks, like acutely, then we can go, okay, this again in isolation doesn't necessarily mean anything, but in combination with other factors all at once, this can also represent that we now are moving into a problematic metabolic state. The other one is that blood viscosity will spike as well. So again, there's a lot of contention over what's called secondary erythrocytosis, which is blood thickening from androgens, which is not bad because it's part of the therapeutic mechanism of action. Red blood cells go up, blood gets thicker. That's not bad in the right context. But if you're constantly pulling a hematocrit of 48, 49, 50, 48, 49, 58, then we're going, okay, this is a... And
58, you see that sometimes.
Absolutely.
Jesus.
Absolutely. So and that's an extreme example, but if we're looking at, okay, let's say hematocrit spiked by, let's say something more conservative, it's gone from 50 to 55 acutely, AST and ALT have jumped up to 70 from, 30s, low 40s maybe. And LDL has, increased by 50%, HDL has gone down by 50%. That to me is combined with symptoms. So typically the symptoms, if someone overshoots testosterone by a little bit. So I'm not talking if you start taking a gram, because you're going to have much more acute symptoms. But if someone's overshot their TRT dose by 25, 30 milligrams a week, the stuff that they'll typically report is increased postprandial sweating, especially after carbs. The other one that they'll report is just inappropriate sweating in general. Now, I run hot. You mentioned before you run hot as well. So again, that's a baseline thing. But if you're in a situation, you kind of know what clothes to wear and how you're going to respond to the weather and environments. So if you start sweating inside, wearing what you would usually wear in that kind of climate, you can kind of self-assess that. So sweating, but particularly postprandial sweats going up as well. And then the other one, and this is when it helps. I don't like people, if people want to track their sleep and track their biometrics, cool. I don't do it personally. I don't tell people to do it, but for the people who do it, it is useful to get the data that they've already got. You'll just see that sleep just goes to shit. Deep sleep goes down, REM sleep goes down, light sleep goes up, time in bed without being asleep. But the architecture of the sleep cycles just goes out the window. And that's because the central nervous system becomes overstimulated 24/7, so you're not getting a proper circadian rhythm. Those are the main ones. And then if they're going to measure their blood pressure properly, and they often don't do that, or they're anxious about the increase in testosterone jacking their blood pressure up, so blood pressure goes up. But if you can get an accurate measure of blood pressure, all of those things will coincide with increased blood pressure as well. So those symptoms tend to occur when the dose is too high. So the way that I recommend that practitioners do it is that you look at both of those factors. So we've got, subjective symptoms and we've got objective measures in the blood. And the way that I like to do it is go titrate up. And again, I'm not telling people, I'm not a doctor, I'm not telling people what to do, but practitioners, you titrate the dose up by the least amount you can per injection. So typically if it's 250 milligram per mil, you're looking at a 5 milligram per injection increment on your insulin syringe. If it's 200 milligram, you're looking at 4 milligram per mil. That's for those watching, that's the little line on the insulin syringe that you can measure. And if you're doing 2 injections a week or 3 injections a week, which most people are doing, that will coincide to anywhere between what would that be, 8 and 15 milligrams per week of testosterone. And you titrate up by that increment every 16 weeks. Because although you can measure the blood after 8 weeks, well, you can probably measure it after 6 realistically, it takes longer for that testosterone to have the full effect, both subjectively and objectively. And what we're looking for, and this is how I think that people should find the middle point with this pragmatically, and I'd be interested if anyone has any other suggestions based on what I've just said, but I think the best strategy with all of that taken into consideration is going increase the dose until the subjective benefits have been ascertained, the negative symptoms have resolved, but you also have to be conscious that the negative hypogonadal symptoms can be caused by bad diet and lifestyle, so they're not unique, and titrate up to a point that symptoms have resolved and that blood hasn't gotten bad so that you don't have to overshoot it. And you don't have to reach that point where things start to dysregulate. And the problem, there's two problems that take place. One is on behalf of the practitioner, that they're not working in a capacity where they're working that closely with the patient to be able to go, okay, let's optimize this. They just want to get you in the ballpark and go, cool, keep taking the same dose, set and forget, see you later. But the other problem is that patients don't comply with this kind of protocol. They're not going to go, okay, I'm going to get a comprehensive blood test every 16 weeks. I'm only going to titrate my dose up by 10 or 15 milligrams per week, and I'm going to go back and see my practitioner. They're going to do that maybe a couple of weeks, and then they're going to go, oh, I decided that I'm going to increase the dose by this because I wanted to do this. And they come back and they go, oh, I didn't want to pay for that blood test. I just got... Patient compliance is a real challenge with this as well, because a lot of people don't do as they're told, and that can be a real challenge as well. But if the practitioner's on board and the patient's on board, and there are some patients or clients, depending on the vernacular that is legal, that are really great to work with, and they go, yep, cool, I'm going to do this, I want to get this right. And I really think it is worth doing it right, because once you get your optimal dose, you can kind of set and forget that for a while, because yeah, your health and biology is going to change over decades, but it's not going to change dramatically, assuming you continue to look after yourself over months and years. And I really think it's worth, I think the number one priority for every TRT patient should be finding their optimal dose and getting to that point. And it's not a huge amount of work, but at the end of the day, an extra 10 to 15 to 20 milligrams a week, if that's tolerated and beneficial, has a huge difference in your subjective well-being. And then that mapped out over multiple months and years can have a big impact on your quality of life. So I think it's really worth, I mean, it's just as much work injecting 150 milligrams as it is to inject 170 milligrams per week. So it's not changing the amount of work in your protocol, but getting properly optimized and dialed in with what Jay Campbell refers to as like a surgically precise dose of testosterone is really worthwhile.
That's a great answer. And I have like a bazillion follow-ups, but we'll start here. So I have empathy for people that you say are not as coachable, right? You know, these patients that are not as compliant, because I'll just take me, we'll use me as a case study. At this weight, everything has to go right for me to feel good. I'm talking from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed. I have to live in somewhat of a bubble. There are friends of mine who are less sensitive. They call me Bubble Boy. All right. And ironically, these are the friends that can take gear, go out, expose themselves to light at night and just sleep like a baby.
Right.
It's, I don't know what the genetic difference is there. I've got a lot of friends who are athletes, and it just, everything comes natural to them. But for me, bro, everything has to go right. So it's like, what foods am I eating? How much am I eating? How's my digestion? Do I get sunlight exposure in the morning and the evening? The bed set up, I've got to sleep on an incline, put the headphones on, the eye mask, dead quiet, cool, chili pad, you name it. I've got about a list of 50 things in the day that have to go right. But if I nail them, which I always do because I live in an isolated way, I feel great. And I know for sure that a lot of guys out there that have a day job and that and have a more stressful lifestyle, that's nearing impossible. And I figured if I had to do what they did, I'd probably feel a little off too.
Right.
Okay. So I wake up, I'm good, I'm excellent. There are others like me because we take it seriously. And the reason we take it seriously is not because we're chasing some sort of like numbers. It's just we know how it feels to feel so good. And once you get there, as you know, you notice a 10% difference when you're down and you feel terrible. Whereas these other guys, their new norm is like the worst day ever for me. You know, I just can't understand how they manage in a day. Don't get me wrong, I still have the resilience. I can do it if I need to, but you like feeling your best.
Yeah.
So for guys like me, we're also in this stage now. Now we're at the optimizing the last 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
So it got me thinking, where do I look now?
Yeah.
I don't have any issues. My blood work doesn't have any issues, bro. In fact, it improves as the years go on. I can only find one thing, but I find this with everyone that I've found, depending on how you look at it. So when I asked you this question, I asked you this about a year ago, but I want to see if your opinion has changed. So you talked about dyslipidemia when the dose of testosterone goes up. And for my friends that are using higher doses of testosterone and anabolics, that's everyone. I'm talking high ApoB, high LDL, and low HDL. It's almost like this proxy for you're on the gear, bro.
Yep.
Don't lie to me. It's very easy, right? And that happens to me even on TRT. It's not the HDL though, but the ApoB. Now mine's not considered high. It's in the range. It's at the high end of the normal range. It's 100 or 1, depending on the units of measure. Some cardiologists will say, you're fine, you're in range, but then you've got the Peter Attias or Dr. Andrew Wingy, where they'll say that based on what they see with Andrew Wingy in the emergency room and what Peter Attias sees in his papers and his patients is too high to be optimal. They like to see it less than 50. Now, I've tried dietary changes and my lifestyle couldn't really get any better aside from me being less weight, which I've done as well, and it's always stayed there. It's barely moved from 80 to 100. What do you think about artificially lowering ApoB less than 50? Where do you stand in this whole debate? Because it's hot topic right now, right?
It is, and it's become a hot topic in the recent years, and previously it wasn't even a topic of discussion, really. I mean, maybe it was, but I wasn't privy to it. I try not to have opinions on things that I'm not 100% on. So everything I'm going to say about this topic is coming from a perspective that is, I would consider, relatively uninformed. I'm not a cardiologist. I don't have any interest. I don't have any interest in cardiology beyond it being peripheral, but still involved in what I do. So when I get people come to me for coaching with a bunch of like advanced cardiology questions and they want to know everything about their lipids, I'm like, it's not for me. I can't answer this. So the way that I look at it, and I'm very open to being educated on this, but I'm never going to become an expert on it because you can only be an expert on so many things. So I'm really trying not to be a jack of all trades, master of none. And I also don't advocate the use of high doses of steroids, period. So it's not a something that I think that I need to be as privy to. But my general opinion on it is that, as far as I'm aware, the reason that people would be measuring ApoB, and this is a very rudimentary statement, is that they're measuring their risk of dying from cardiovascular disease. That's what we're all. That's the end game. People don't want to die from having a heart attack, and I think that's a fair thing. You know, if you don't want to die, I think that should be everyone's priority. And the better you're doing in life, the more of a concern you have about dying. And that's the thing that's interesting that I've observed, is that the more you have to lose, the more you don't want to lose it. So it can become a very difficult point of anxiety for a lot of guys where they didn't take care of themselves well when they were younger, and then they've built something now that they want to stick around for, and they go, maybe I've screwed this up and I've prematurely taken 10 or 20 or 30 years off my life. And that's why I'm constantly advising these younger guys to go, your future self probably wouldn't advise you to do a cycle of 2 grams of gear at the moment for the sake of gaining a bit of extra muscle in a short space of time, because of the potential ramifications in the future. The risk to reward ratio is not going to be worth it in hindsight. So when it comes to ApoB, and maybe this is just, again, my biases, but I'm aware of my biases, is that I am much more interested in saying, go get a comprehensive cardiovascular scan if you want to see what's going on with your heart. Because the problem with blood work is that blood work fluctuates every day you get it. It fluctuates every hour that you get it. It fluctuates based on a whole bunch of other factors as well. Now, if you're measuring your bloods for like a gene or something like that, of course, it's not going to fluctuate. But anything to do with lipids, including ApoB, will be subject to at least some degree of fluctuation. The problem that we have with lipids, and this is the big thing around LDL, is there's a big genetic component to it, massive. And that's why so much of the data on LDL is contradictory. And it's also because there are other variables that play into LDL. So if you've got one guy who's got a genetically high LDL and lives a perfect diet and lifestyle, and another guy who's got a genetically low LDL but lives like trash, and they've got the same LDL levels, they don't have the same risk of cardiovascular disease. And that's a very oversimplified statement for why this issue is so contentious, because people are looking myopically at one variable in a series of interconnected systems. And you're also looking at data that I think is relatively rudimentary, because the scan of the arteries overrules the blood work, because the blood work is just basically saying to me, and this is where I always refer people out to specialists. I go, look, this is above my pay grade. This is above my expertise. So this is my coaching. Go and get the scan from your doctor and then go see this person who can interpret the results. But don't fret over what the blood work could or couldn't mean. Get the scan done, and then we actually know what that blood work means. And I think that a fear factor that a lot of people have is that the blood work's basically saying, could there be a monster under the bed? And the more the blood work goes in X direction, the more of a chance there is that there's a monster under the bed. I think some people just want to tell themselves there's not a monster under the bed because they don't want to look. Because if they look, they might be going, okay, well, that monster's going to fuck me up. Or I can't get rid of that monster. If there is a monster there, that's not a monster I can beat. Sometimes it's important to check under the bed because that is a monster that we can beat. Things like liver disease, for example, unless you've progressed to late stage cirrhosis, a lot of stuff is treatable or at least manageable, if not reversible. So it's like we want to see that monster before he gets too big, because if he gets too big and you leave it too long, you're fucked. So when it comes to the ApoB stuff, my understanding of cardiology is that cardiovascular disease will only occur if there is stimulus that will inflame the arterial lining. And generally, the stimulus that will inflame the arterial lining for most people is related to drugs, alcohol, not doing enough exercise. And there's a trifecta there because we've got healthy and unhealthy user bias. So people who don't care about, let's say, smoking a pack of cigarettes a day probably aren't also very diligent with their diet and also aren't very diligent with their exercise. So then you get compounding factors, and then you basically just have multiple fires that you're pouring gasoline on, then they get together and become a big fire and you get a big problem. So when I look at things like ApoB is impacted by a bunch of factors, but it's also got a genetic set point. So if someone's got genetically different variable numbers for their where their lipids sit by default, my general approach with it is if you optimize all the factors for diet and lifestyle and not developing cardiovascular disease, which the most common root cause, because people who are health conscious are not generally smoking and drinking a bunch, is insulin resistance. Is that if you have a healthy metabolic function and you're not poisoning your body every day, you don't have the stimulus to start that fire. And to me, ApoB is saying if that fire starts, it's going to be a big fire. So it's kind of like we use the example a lot that like we've all met or heard of someone, at least maybe not met, but heard of someone who, their grandparent smoked a pack of cigarettes a day and drank 6 beers a night and lived till 100 and died peacefully in their sleep. That's an exception to the rule. That doesn't disprove anything. Exceptions always exist. But if we're looking at someone who, and this is where I think the long-winded answer to ApoB is if someone's got high ApoB, they're not going to be the exception to the rule. They're going to be someone who's going to more likely pay the consequences of that poor diet and lifestyle decision. So for me, looking at pragmatic health coaching rather than diagnosing and treating cardiovascular disease because it's a different department, I'm going focus on the variables that you can control. And if you want to investigate it further, get the best quality scan that you can get that's going to pick up the soft plaque, that's going to give you all this information. And then if the blood work's showing, okay, well, your ApoB is high, so that means according to this study that means you're going to develop this, but you're going, but I don't have this. It's not there. I've checked. It's not there. And I think sometimes people use blood work in placement of a scan. Blood work just says, do I need to scan this? It doesn't say anything more than that to me. Now, if someone comes in and their triglycerides are 5 times elevated above the reference range, yeah, you should scan it, but I could tell you the scan's not going to be good. That kind of stuff's obvious. But when it comes to these more kind of nuanced, low-risk optimization stuff, I'm sitting here being like, if someone's got high ApoB, and again, not medical advice, not my expertise, but if someone's got higher suboptimal ApoB, but all their metabolic parameters are optimal, they're not doing any of the stuff that would lead to cardiovascular disease, and they've got a clear artery scan, I'd be sitting here being like, the anxiety about heart disease is probably the biggest problem.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And that's where I'm at. So obviously I'm not on any statins or PCSK9s. I did learn recently from Dr. Andrew Wingy, even the scan with the contrast can also not show everything because apparently the plaque can be building from behind.
Yep.
But these inaccuracies, I think it's like 10% or less. So there's a 90% chance if you don't see any soft plaque there, you don't have any. And apparently with a CAC, which is just a scan, I had that, I got a score of 0. Even that's 85% accurate.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm here waiting for more info to come out. That's the stage I'm at. because I'm not entirely convinced on either side. And I know Dave Feldman and Paul Saladino, they're running that study for people with high LDL, much higher than me, like 3 times the reference range, for these lean mass hyper responders. And I think it's like a few years in now, and they haven't built any extra plaque.
Yeah.
But it's obviously early days, because this thing is something that happens over decades.
Yeah.
But I'm caught in this kind of place where that Derek Moore Plates, he goes, yeah, I get that side. Why not just take a statin or a PCSK9 just to get rid of it anyway? You don't have to think about it. But then people like me, which leads me to my next question. I'm one of these people because I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder, which I don't have anymore. You don't really have them until you're doing something to make them flare up. I have thyroid antibodies. They go like 1,000x when I'm doing something wrong. Can be a variety of things, usually diet. Don't have it now, but when I take medications, I get flares, usually digestive, skin problems. And so the reason I don't take medications that I'd love to potentially take, whether it's a statin or a GLP or something to lose weight, is because I'm always that guy that gets the side effects. And not being a hypochondriac, like I'm that guy.
Yeah.
Do you have clients like that even though there are certain medications that could be useful for them, maybe it's, I don't know, even fish oil or metformin, they're just so sensitive to these meds or supplements from like a digestive or autoimmune standpoint? Do you have clients like this?
Yeah. So I can't diagnose anything, obviously, but when it comes to these kind of issues, you see a lot of patterns come up, because one of the blessings I've had in my career kind of taking off in this space is that I tend to get more troubleshooting cases. And I like that because they're more difficult, they're more challenging. I tend to get people coming to me when they're like, I've seen everyone, I've seen all these people, no one can solve this, but I thought I'd just run it by you. And then we tend to get to the bottom of it. And that I really enjoy that, because that's where you learn a lot. But you definitely see patterns, because people think they're unique, that people aren't unique. They may be in a small bucket, but they're in a bucket. So when it comes to people getting side effects from medication, so I think, and again, I'm biased, but I've chosen my biases. I'm from an optimization standpoint, so from a healthy individual standpoint, if people are sick and they need medications, and they need to go to a medical doctor, and that's entirely different discussion. But from a health optimization standpoint, I think that health should be optimized, and I don't have anything bad to say about anyone, and I will never do that professionally, but I'm not I'm neutral towards the work of Gary Brecker. Not a huge fan of a lot of people's work, but one thing that he really correctly says is that the most important thing for human health is amino acids, essential fatty acids, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients. So nutrients for the human body. A long time ago, they made a list of all the essential nutrients for the human body. And it's not all of them, but they basically put this umbrella term around, again, all the amino acids, omega-3, 6, and 9, all the vitamins, minerals we've identified, and then phytonutrients and flavonoids. And there's this kind of big list. I don't know what the number is, but it's deemed like all the essential nutrients to the human body. I think, and this is just my approach that underlies a lot of what I do, is that human health should be able to be optimized, assuming someone is healthy and wants to maintain health, by maintaining good diet and lifestyle practices, optimizing their intake of all the essential nutrients the body needs to do what it does. And also in this day and age, and this is my take on this in terms of my biases, sometimes that also involves the need to optimize hormone production, because I think that there's a lot of stuff in the environment that's unavoidable. We were talking about air quality here before. These things are not avoidable. I mean, unless you go and live on a tropical island somewhere, then maybe. But that's how I look at it. So I like things that are bioidentical or essential to the human body, and then focusing on what we do, not what we take. So I think that all medications cause side effects, and you can't really hide from that. So for example, people often talk about tadalafil, and I don't want to freak anyone out about not taking tadalafil. Tadalafil absolutely has its place. It is massively beneficial, but systemically inhibiting PDE5 does stuff outside of your dick. Like it does other things. For example, it reduces clearance of cortisol. We don't fully understand the outcomes of that because no one's looked into it. So medications basically, when you take a medication and you're either increasing something or inhibiting something, which tends to be what these medications do, you create a favorable outcome in the department that you're hoping to improve, but you can also create issues in other departments because the body is this series of interconnected systems, which is what Paul Chek talks about. So in the case of someone who's sick, the pros outweigh the cons. Because if we're in a situation being like, well, this medication causes side effects, but if we don't treat the underlying issue, they're going to be dead, which is the ultimate problem. So if we can prevent death, then the side effects that it can cause or does cause are less problematic. And the biggest example of that, which I don't have any educated opinions on cancer, but chemotherapy is the best example of that. Will kill the cancer. Everything else that comes with it is not as bad as the death from the cancer, and people kind of debate that. Again, I have no stance on chemotherapy. So when it comes to medications, people need to accept that all medications will have some degree of unfavorable outcome. Now, when it comes to people who get side effects from all medications, so basically like cases like you, I use the example, like if something causes a side effect, you're going to get it. And it's not a placebo effect from reading the package insert or going on Dr. Google and creating that in yourself. It's a legitimate, everything that I create gives me a side effect. And I think that there can be two reasons for this. One is that some people are more self-aware. So we get, if you look at the studies in psychiatry, they say that SSRI antidepressants don't have any effect for 8 weeks. If I gave you 100 milligrams of Zoloft right now and we went out for dinner later, you'd probably go, I feel this, because absolutely it does. Because you're more subjectively aware of your baseline, because you're more aware of deviating from that baseline.
Definitely.
So some people are not self-aware when it comes to a lot of things, not just health, but actions, everything. So self-awareness can be a blessing and a curse. I would always look at it and frame this as a blessing because I don't see any reason why self-awareness is not a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone is getting side effects from all medications and supplements, to me, looking at how the body works, and we're assuming that they're objective side effects now, is that I think that is typically a result of reduced liver clearance of the medication. Because if you take a medication and you can't clear it as efficiently, it means it's going to have a stronger biological effect. So if someone's got hypothyroidism, which if you've had flares of periods where you've had thyroglobulin or antithyroid peroxidase or both elevated, that means that your immune system has attacked your thyroid. So I always use the Game of Thrones analogy for hypothyroidism. And if anyone hasn't seen Game of Thrones, it doesn't spoil it, but also everyone should have seen Game of Thrones, is that if we're looking at the last season, the iconic, very dark episode, the Battle of Winterfell, if you've got your Dothraki army out the front, which is your immune system, and you in this analogy are the castle, is it the castle of Winterfell or are they attacking let's say it's the Battle of Winterfell. So I might be getting that wrong. But in this scenario, you want your Dothraki army to be ready to attack the White Walkers that are coming in. That's what they're there for. That's the ideal situation. And let's say in this analogy, the White Walkers are like, I don't know, pneumonia, contagious disease, like bacterial infections, everything that you want your immune system to defend you from. So if you've got an autoimmune condition, those Dothraki are attacking the castle. They've turned around and they're running at the castle and they're attacking the castle walls. Not ideal. Now, how much damage can the Dothraki do against the castle walls? Maybe not a huge amount, but over time, they could probably wear down the defenses. But the problem now is that if those White Walkers come in, not only are the Dothraki flanked because they're facing the wrong direction, they've already damaged the castle and they're already pretty gassed because they've constantly been attacking and attacking and attacking. So not only is your body already compromised, but your immune system is distracted and depleted. And this is why people with autoimmune conditions are typically considered immunocompromised. So the problem that we have, if this castle in this instance, or the part of the castle they're attacking is your thyroid, is that thyroid has become damaged. And even if you call the Dothraki off and you resolve the physiological or circumstantial state that was causing the antibodies to flare up, they've done damage to the wall. And you can't go in and rebuild your thyroid. We don't know how to do that yet. Now, potentially bioregulated peptides could be the way to treat that. We don't really know. But if you're in a scenario like that, damage has been done to the thyroid. So the problem that we have here is that the thyroid is responsible for a lot of really internal, important biological functions, particularly the function of the liver. So when people have hypothyroidism, they're often very sensitive to caffeine because they clear the caffeine slower. And now it creates this, again, like this dichotomy situation because people with hypothyroidism have low energy. So they tend to self-medicate with caffeine, then they get more side effects from the caffeine. And it's either going, do I want to be anxious or tired? And they end up in this really tricky state. But in this situation, I would hypothesize, and again, I can't say for sure, but if the thyroid is suboptimal due to damage, even if you've called off the attack from the autoimmune system, it's still been damaged over the years, so it couldn't be functioning optimally, then that could be resulting in reduced liver clearance of these medications.
If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
I've been thinking about this lately. Obviously, my friends, athletes, they use gear. You know, not all of them, by the way, but a lot of them are bodybuilders, so they need to use gear. And then I had friends come to me and they say, look, I haven't checked my blood work in a while. I'm thinking of doing it. And my first question now is, so will you change your dose if you see anything? And a lot of the time the answer is, hell no.
Yeah.
I'm like, so why go get the blood test then, bro?
Yeah.
They aren't thinking about a decision node. And I was thinking about myself. And I want to know if this is irresponsible. It's been 14 months since I've had a blood test. I haven't changed my dose for, I think it's coming up, 11, 12, 13 years, 150 milligrams a week. It always looks the same unless I'm sick in Bali. There was once, because I don't check thyroid every time. There was once my T4 was in range, but at the low end of normal.
Right.
And then those thyroid antibodies in 2017, but every time after I checked it, it was normal. I even did a ultrasound on my thyroid when I saw the antibodies, and it was normal.
No.
So maybe even the test itself was wrong. It could have been if all the other tests were normal.
Could have been a bad day.
Yeah, it could have just been a bad day. So I am asymptomatic. In fact, on the days that I feel good, I'm good. And I know when I'm down, and it's only one thing.
Yeah.
If I've been following everything correctly, every time I just train too hard.
Yeah.
Too hard, too long. It's just my mentality. As soon as I have a day or two off, boom, I'm back. Not just back with subjective well-being. It's also blood pressure, heart rate, all of it. There's like a day when you overtrain, if you've really like dug deep, where your blood pressure gets a little bit high, heart rate gets a bit high, sleep's a bit trash. Take a day off and then you're like super compensate.
Yep.
So I guess where I'm at now is how irresponsible is it of me to just not check my blood work? And I don't know when the next time it is that I'm going to get one, because I'm thinking, if I get this test, am I going to change anything? My answer is absolutely not. I'm living as good as I possibly can. So why get the test?
Yep. Yeah, I completely understand. I think, again, if there's a spectrum of irresponsibility, it's on the spectrum, but it's not high on the spectrum. But that's due to the other confounding factors that you've mentioned, is that you're looking after yourself and all the variables you've kept are the same. If you were not dialed in, if you were, not looking after yourself properly, if you were like in your first couple of years on TRT and you were still getting things dialed in, completely different story. When it comes to how testosterone is scheduled in most countries, you have to get a blood test done every 6 months to continue getting your script. A lot of guys don't like that. From someone who works with the clinics on the back end, it's the best thing in the world because you have to get it done. So it basically forces compliance for the thing that you need to get done to make sure that you're going to be in good health long term. So I like that is the legal requirement. But from a standpoint of looking at someone like yourself, who would be an outlier in terms of how well you look after yourself, most of the guys I know who've been stable on their dose for 5 years, 10 years, and they understand all this stuff, tend to get blood work done every year. And, every year can fluctuate by a few months here or there. The reason why I always recommend people get blood work done every year as a minimum, ideally, and obviously stuff can happen. Sometimes there could be 18 months between blood tests if you're traveling, 2 years, whatever. Not ideal, but fine. is that trends are more important than acute blood tests. Because like you said, if you got a blood test done every year, but one of the blood tests that you got done was just a bad day and you'd done a big workout the day before, which would kind of make the blood test a bit redundant, but let's say you did, is that we could be looking at something to be like, we don't know if this is a trend. We don't know if this is valuable. So if something does happen down the line, it's really helpful to have 5 to 10 years of annual blood testing to be able to be like, has this progression been something that we can pick up looking in hindsight? Or could we be able to see, it's kind of like getting your car serviced. Like if you wait until the engine starts smoking or there's a problem or the lights come on, then you could be looking at a bigger bill than if you just taken it into the mechanic every 6 months or 12 months for the minor service. So from an irresponsibility standpoint, it's well within the spectrum of not ideal, but okay. But for the sake of like just being pragmatic and being aware of things in the future, I think getting blood work done every year is a good exercise so that you can put it in the folder so that if something does happen, you can go, here's my blood test from every year. Because when I get clients who like, when they rock up for a consultation, they're like, here's my blood work folder of a blood test every year. I'm like, this makes my job so much easier.
Can imagine, man. You know, if I had to pick one excuse, it's because here the bureaucracy and the assay methodology, it's like 50 years ago, bro. There are certain tests you can't even get that I want. So to start off with, I have to fly to another country to get certain tests. But then I looked at the assay methods, which, by the way, it took me ages to get in contact with the guy who even knew. They're testing in ways, especially thyroid, that I don't think are going to accurately reflect my trends because of where I tested them in the past.
Yeah.
Now, I understand I'm an outlier. Most people are getting blood tests in the country where they grew up and they're still living there. But for people like me that are bouncing around the world, it brings me into the next segue because it's also come up more recently. You've got people comparing numbers around the world, Australia, UK, Europe, America, but they're all using different assay methods. Now there seems to be some sort of standard being formed, like you get the LCMS for the testosterone, the LCMS for the estradiol. That was awesome when I could see that because I noticed that with a regular immunoassay, my testosterone would be 20% higher on the lab than the LCMS.
Yeah.
Which is kind of consistent with what I found on ChatGPT. But now the next thing. Now I'm like, all right, here we go. So people like, I really want your take on this. People like Andrew Wingy are of the belief that testing estradiol in general is a useless test because something's going on in the cell that we can't see. Where are you with this thing where the actual serum levels of these hormones may not even accurately represent what we need anyway?
Yeah, when it comes to serum estradiol levels, the late Dr. John Chrysler used to say that serum estradiol is a proxy for systemic estrogen activity, not just E2, but E1, E3 in the cells. And I think that if people take that number as like a hard number, like a black letter number, and take it as an exact, precise measurement, that can be really confusing because you're like, well, why is my estradiol fluctuating by 50, 60% every time I get a blood test? It's because it's not accurate. It's just measuring the spillover that was in the serum on that day. So when people want to really surgically, precisely optimize their estradiol to a very narrow range, it's a bit of a redundant exercise because you're trying to precisely optimize an inaccurate number, which is just silly. So with that said, there's kind of these two extremes. So that's one extreme, and the other extreme of the argument is don't measure it at all; it's useless. And I kind of sit in the middle, and I think in a lot of cases the truth is in the middle. I understand full well logistically why it's a nightmare for doctors to measure estradiol when the patients get the blood test before the doctor gets the results. Because the problem is the patient gets the results, they go on ChatGPT, they go on Google, they freak out, they buy some anastrozole from whoever will sell it, and then they end up in this, by the time they actually have the follow-up appointment with the doctor, then everything's just completely gone to shit. That's a real challenge. I get why people do it because they're operating from a space of anxiety. They're making a non-educated reactive decision, and that's part of human nature, but it's a pain. So I get why doctors go, they just don't even measure it, because then they can go, okay, well, we've eliminated that problem before it started. I get both of these perspectives. Well, maybe I don't get this one. I get this one. But they're both present. I understand how they happen. The estrogen number is, so in Australia, when people get a blood test, due to how the panels are bundled, whether it's through Medicare or through private, they tend to always, or not always, but like let's say 95% of the time, measure testosterone, and then if you're lucky, SHBG, free testosterone, and estradiol. If you're unlucky, you'll get total testosterone, estradiol. So I'd say I've looked at probably within, maybe 5%, the same amount of estradiol readings as testosterone readings over my 5-year career doing this. And I find the number to be useful when taken with a grain of salt, because I'm looking at it in conjunction with other numbers, like prolactin, particularly the relationship between estradiol, prolactin, cortisol, and if you check it, reverse T3, is useful. And the reason for that is that estrogen, and Ray Peat spoke about this a lot, is that estrogen could also be considered to be somewhat of a stress hormone, because estrogen, like cortisol, is anti-inflammatory, has a lot of anti-inflammatory properties. So what happens is, for example, if the body, let's say someone's got an excess amount of body fat, the reason why there's more aromatase in the fat tissue is because it's protective. So we're in a situation being like, we're often blaming the fire engines for starting the fire. And the fire engines may be annoying. I mean, the sirens are going off and the estrogenic side effects are not ideal, but there is no one who is a genetic over-aromatizer. Everyone who says they're a genetic over-aromatizer is either overweight, drinking too much alcohol, has liver issues, or has a thyroid problem, or their protocol's junk. Like, it's one of those things, or they're taking HCG. So there's always a reason why someone is having an estrogen or estrogenic problem, and it's because their body is out of balance in some way. Because physiological optimal amounts of testosterone delivered in a stable fashion should not cause you to make too much feminizing hormone metabolites. That just doesn't make any sense. If it did, then the healthy 18, 19, 20-year-olds would all need to take an anastrozole because their testosterone levels are peaking, they'd be over-aromatizing. It doesn't make any sense. But if you're taking a testosterone injection every fortnight or every week, you're taking 200 milligrams a week in one bolus dose, you could be getting some side effects. Now, an aromatase inhibitor is not the solution to that, but I understand how people get to that conclusion. It's just the wrong conclusion. So when it comes to measuring it, it comes down to the skill of the practitioner. And Dr. Chrysler, again, used to say there's an art and a science to TRT. And the longer that I do this, the more I realize what that art part is, which is that you have to look at each individual as a not completely unique, but a somewhat unique biochemical individual. There's so much individual biochemical uniqueness to a human that we have to look at everything individually. And sometimes that estradiol number is useful. I mean, I've seen guys come in to see me for coaching. They've got a free testosterone level at like the top of the range, maybe a little bit above, and they've got an estradiol of like 500, 600, 700 picomole per liter, which I think in the US units is like 150 or so, like a really big number, like a number that is massively disproportionately higher. Even in, looking at being like, yeah, some guys have higher estrogen levels, some guys have lower estrogen levels. It doesn't cause symptoms. I'm talking like double the top of what would be considered high. Like it's blown through the sky. That guy doesn't need an aromatase inhibitor. He needs to get to the root cause of why that's happening. So when it comes to checking for estrogen levels in the blood, you're not checking for the cause of a problem. You're kind of checking for something related to the symptoms of what could be going on. So I think if we're going to say that estrogen is a useless blood measurement because it's not an accurate representation of paracrine hormone activity, which is true, then you could apply that to every blood test. Because you could be like, well, why check LDL? If LDL's got genetic variability, why check that? I mean, it's going to be, why check all the markers? I mean, none of those markers are perfect. If AST and ALT can be jacked up by taking Panadol the night before, then, or training the day before, then it's a useless measurement. Throw it out. So I get why people have different approaches to it. My initial kind of foray into health coaching was from Chris Kresser, and he had this saying, test, not guess. So I don't see the harm if we're already taking the blood out of the arm. I don't see the harm in running the estrogen panel. It's just how you apply that data that can be problematic.
Great answer. I guess at the end of the day, you've got your way or your art of getting the outcome. And
Yeah.
obviously, you being booked all the time, it's working, right? I mean, that's
hope so.
about as proof as we need, right? Yeah, that's interesting. So I thought about this as we were talking, and I'm like, man, we've been speaking for a couple hours, and we're barely beginning to scratch the surface. And I thought, okay, if I went all the way back in time and I had to be 18 years old again, learn this from scratch, it's a lot. Like, it's so much that I have empathy for men that are very busy. I was super lucky early on, bro. You know, I spoke about this in the first podcast with you. Got lucky in business, had the free time. I could focus on all my health issues. If I didn't, I'm really not sure. So I guess my question now is for the young men. Usually it's younger men, but sometimes it's older guys too that haven't figured this out.
Yeah.
I don't know how to phrase this without offending dudes, because I do care about my fellow man.
Mhm.
The guys that are just total disasters / mess, they're in loser mode right now. And there's unfortunately a lot of them. In fact, the majority of men are in that stage.
Mhm.
They're not financially there. Their physique sucks. You know, everything is just in the shitter. Women aren't taking a second look at them. Okay, this is very common. How do they balance all this education, but by also managing their already busy life?
Yeah.
Do you have any clients where you're just sometimes stumped, where you're like, man, you're just going to have to stop seeing your kid as much? Quit that second job. Like, do you ever have these hard conversations where you're like, this is such a priority for you because you're going to die that you're just going to have to stop some of the other stuff?
Shift work's a problem. Shift work's a big problem. Particularly like, you know, we both grew up in Perth, like FIFO guys,
Big
like
time,
working up
yeah.
in the mines. So for people who don't who fly in, fly out, very common in Western Australia because you can basically finish school, go get depending on your skill level, you can get a pretty cushy like supervisor job, or you can be underground, breathing in fumes, completely dysregulated circadian rhythm for 2-3 weeks away at a time. And you can make good money doing that. And a lot of the time guys will do it because that's how they can provide for their family, and they'll take that self-sacrificing role. And I have an enormous amount of respect for people who do that. I couldn't do it.
Either.
But the problem that I often speak to guys about is they'll be doing shift work, and maybe it's not that, maybe it's they're a paramedic or they're a cop or there's lots of roles that do shift work, nurses, and the situation that they're in is they're like, oh, I've got all these, not like massive problems, but they're like, oh, this is suboptimal and that's suboptimal. I'm like, it's because you're doing shift work. And they're like, well, what supplements and biohacks can I do to offset it? I'm like, well, when you get home, you can sleep with blackout blinds and you can take melatonin and you can make sure you get enough sunlight. But the Australian saying would be that's like pissing on a bushfire. Like you can offset some of it, and you can absolutely do some stuff that's going to make a significant difference. And some people can manage it really well, and some people can't. And if you're in a situation where you're like, hey, I'm doing everything I can, and I still just don't feel good, it's going, well, either continue feeling the way that you're feeling and do the shift work, or you need to get out of the shift work in order to feel better. And then they'll sometimes be in a situation being like, well, my skill set doesn't apply to anything that's not shift work. I'm like, that's a problem. I don't have a solution, but that's a problem. And that's where my ability to solve the problem ends, because I'm like, well, I don't have a solution to that. But that's a real issue, and that's a real problem. And sometimes the solution is that you can get better swings, or you can take a different role that maybe it could be a little less pay, or maybe if you work harder, you can move into a higher role that doesn't have the harsh swings. There's always a solution. It's just that the solution often takes a lot of work, or maybe the solution requires you to be at a higher level in some aspect than you're at the moment, and you have to work towards that. But that's been the thing that comes up the most in terms of answering that question is shift work, because I get guys doing shift work and their CRP is just jacked all the time.
Yeah,
5,
wow.
10, 15. Everything else is in order. Triglycerides is in order. Insulin sensitivity is good. They don't have any injuries. And it's like, yeah, that CRP is not going to go undetectable until you stop doing the shift work.
Yeah, man, it's heavy. So I guess this is how I see it. I could be completely wrong, but the way I see it, with the way the economy is now compared to the boomers, it's much harder for a man to make a living. Cost of living is up. I don't think anyone's disagreeing with that. But for women, the ease of life has remained pretty much constant. I'll be honest. If you are a beautiful looking girl, you're kind, you take care of yourself. I mean, it's an estrogenic environment out there. They're not necessarily needing to optimize testosterone. I know they are, but not as much as men. It feels like everything is against the young man to get ahead. But for women, it's stayed pretty much constant. And I'm guessing that there's so many men out there that they're in a place where this modern environment, this competition, it's difficult. You've got the people like your Andrew Tates, your Wes Watson, they're out there. They're just kicking absolute ass. The only difference is now that these men are able to see it on social media, but so can the available women. So the available women now know there are options one Instagram message away. They're in Perth, for example. They're not necessarily limited to these men. They're like, I don't need to stick with this loser. I'll go to Dubai. I got the message. So it feels like it's gotten hyper competitive for men, easier for women. Is there a point at which you look at certain clients or people that you know, and I've had to have these conversations myself, where I've told him, bro, you just need to lower your standards in life. And it's a harsh conversation because I could be wrong. You know, who am I to tell someone not to try? But the certain women they're looking to get, the certain job aspirations, income aspirations, physique aspirations, there's a genetic limit to this for a lot of dudes. Now, for me, I've always had what I wanted. I'd love more, but I've always got what I wanted, the things, people around me that I want. What do you say to guys that you think are just maybe shooting for the stars, but they need to lower their standards?
Well, we often hear about the example of like the women who, I don't want to say anything too harsh, but let's say the women who are very physically unattractive, who believe that they're entitled to a man who's like the epitome of, the perfect embodiment of Giga Chad. I like to use as the funny meme kind of term for that. Like we often hear about that all the time. And I think that it goes both ways. And I think it goes both ways in not just selection criteria for mates, but just life in general, like what you're talking about. I think as someone who grew up, again, punk rock musician for a long time, I didn't ever think I would be running my own business because I didn't want to do it. Like there were a lot of factors that went into that. Is that I think that there are kind of two paths towards living a fulfilling life realistically. And I remember sitting down with my business mentor, who I was speaking about before, my first business mentor when I was doing digital marketing. And at the time I was basically in a role, doing this was like Facebook funnels back when the Pixel was first available. So like kind of right when there was like a social media boom first taking off. And I had a few clients and, I'd done a couple of nightclub launches and things were going kind of well. It was right before I had my brain injury. So, maybe things would have taken off, who knows? But I hated every second of it. I was just doing it because that was the thing I could do that made me the most money per hour. And that I hated the least. I didn't have to work underground in the coal mines to do it. I wouldn't have been able to do that. It was the thing that I could do that I hated the least that made me the most money per hour. So I was like, well, if I can do this, and I think I was probably billing out at maybe like 60, 70 bucks an hour doing digital creative work, which at the time was great. I would go, well, that means I can work half as much. And that means I can spend that time sleeping in and playing video games. And I was like, perfect. And that was a horrible mindset that I had, but that was where I was at in my early 20s. And I think a lot of guys are there. And I sat down and I was speaking to my business mentor, and I to this day, I don't know how much money he was making at the time, but he was doing well. Not crazy well, but he was doing well. He was doing much better than a guy in his mid-20s would be. And we were sitting on my balcony and he was at the point where he kept kind of pushing the boundary of burnout because he was working so hard on what he was doing, because he loved building like a digital online brand for himself and he loved his work. He was like, he was so good at Facebook ads and digital marketing. Like he understood it so intrinsically and it inspired like a lot of what I've done with my brand. But he like lived and breathed this. And I said to him, I wish that I loved something that made me money as much as you love what you do, because I loved playing music and playing video games. That didn't do shit for my financial career. So I basically had to go to work to suffer so that I could then enjoy my free time. And he was basically, and he said to me, he said, I love going to work and opening the Facebook ads manager as much as you love being on stage. And I was like, that is so fortunate for you. I was like, that must be awesome. And he's like, it is. I didn't think I would ever find something that made me money that I enjoyed. Like I would do, and I say it all the time, and I often do it just accidentally when I'm talking to people. I would do what I do for free. Like I would have I'd have what I do in a consultation, I would do for free. I would have those conversations for free because I love doing it. I really enjoy it. I'm good at it, and it brings me fulfillment. So I am unbelievably, extraordinarily blessed, and I don't say, it's an earned privilege that I've gotten to a point where I love what I do, and what I do allows me to look after myself and my family. That is a blessing. Not everyone is going to be able to find that, and that's totally okay. And I think what you have to do in that situation, which is what I would have done had I not had the brain injury and fallen into this. And I also think that there is nothing wrong with the other pathway. And I think that a lot of the content around people in the make money, build personal brand spaces go, if you're not doing this, you're a loser. And I don't like that because there are people who, and this is not a lesser option, this is a fantastic option, is that if you are working a role that puts a roof over your head, that provides for your family, that allows you to show up and do an honest day's work, and you don't hate it, and you can find something that you can get out of bed and go to and not dread, you have to find the fulfillment outside of your work. And that's in your hobbies, and that's in your spare time. So you have to optimize the 5 to 9. And if you're not optimizing if your 9 to 5 is something that has to put a roof over your head, and you need to find a way to get, satisfaction and enjoyment and fulfillment from something that doesn't earn you money, from hobbies like surfing or fishing or, whatever your thing is, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different path. But it's one or the other, and you got to pick one. And if you want to optimize life for hobbies, if you want to optimize life for what you do outside of work, that is totally okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different path to life. And I think it's really fortunate that people can find a career that puts it, that they love working and they love what they do. But if you love surfing, or if you love, doing something in your hobbies and your free time, that is absolutely wonderful if you find that path in life. But you have to put the work into making that happen. And you have to optimize every hour of your spare time to make that viable. And you have to put the work into actually getting up and doing your hobbies, not just getting home at the end of the day, crashing on the couch, having some beers, doing nothing, because that will make you miserable. So I think that both paths are difficult in different ways. And I think this path is fine, but you got to pick a path. You got to find fulfillment in something.
Man, totally agree. Yeah, man, it's like, it's a reality check because you get on social media, and I see it a lot now too, because we'll talk about me. And by the way, this is what Dave does for free because you're here just because you want to be here, by the way. I'm not paying Dave. There's none of that going on. So he actually does what he says. So I see this on social media a lot. Everyone does. It's that you've got these lives to look up to, and it's even happening to me, all right? Even though I know it's happening, and I know it's a little bit of a falsehood, I want to have the best of both worlds, right? I'm in the opposite bucket now. So maybe you can therapy me. It's been that way for so long now, bro, years, but it just doesn't get any better. And I consulted with Dave, by the way, to have a child, which we have had successfully, 4 months old now. And I thought that this would cure it. It does for like 10% of the day. Can't spend all day with your kid, especially a newborn. It's a buffer. 10% is solved. So thank you, Dave, by the way.
Very welcome. 10% is good.
But that other void of just being bored now. And I can't jump into business because like you were saying before, I honestly can't say that I do love business. I think I loved the results I got from business. But now that I have enough money to live for God knows how long, thank you, Bitcoin, when I mentioned Lucky, I don't know what to do with myself, bro. I'm telling you, this is no word of a lie how 99% of my day goes. I wake up in the morning, I do all the biology stuff. That takes a few hours. That gets it out of the way. See my daughter. But then there's this 8-hour period where I'm on X, refreshing the feed all day long on this YouTube rabbit hole, procrastinating, spending 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here, a little bit of macro here, getting nothing done that's fulfilling. It doesn't need to be productive for me anymore, because what does that word even mean? I could be gardening or sewing, and as long as that brought me fulfillment, I'd be cool with that, right? Don't need any more money. But I'm just in this place where for years I just have not found it. I've tried so many things, bro, including this podcast, which I also stopped. And the reason I stopped it is because, you know, it was just getting bored after a while, bro. There's only so many interesting people to talk to.
Yeah.
Like, you know, when you mentioned about small circle, like I'll chat to you, I'll chat to Broderick, a few others, but everyone else that wanted to come on the podcast, I was like, man, this person just doesn't seem interesting, even if they're popular. So I guess being a podcaster wasn't good for me because I'm not that social. This is a pretty interesting thing to start. So what would you say for guys like me? And I know you meet them like sort of, it's hard for me to say this stuff, like high net worth individuals, probably older guys, more older than me. What's left, bro?
Yeah, and it's that stuff's tricky because when again, coming back to putting positive spins on social media people, there's a clip of Andrew Tate where he says that, and I'm paraphrasing it, I'm probably going to butcher it, but unless he's doing something that is like extremely physically stressful, he's painfully bored. And I was able to relate with that very strongly. And my wife's seen this firsthand, and she often is amazed and confused at how I function in terms of if you'd given me a bunch of questions to prepare for the podcast, I wouldn't even look at them. I'd be like, no, because that will make it boring. I'm like, I need it to be somewhat stressful to be able to hold my attention and for it to be interesting. So I like doing things off the cuff. I like writing the speech the night before. I like doing those things because it makes it more challenging, because I thrive under stress and pressure. That's a blessing and a curse. And I've looked at it in terms of how it is genetically, in terms of the brain. It's, you know, for me personally, at least, it's a very fast, aggressive metabolism of dopamine. So basically I'm bored at baseline and then I'm at peace when I'm stimulated. And this is this leads down two paths. It leads down to drugs and hedonism and degeneracy and self-destruction, or it can lead to things like people being in, you know, military, public speakers, surgeons, you know, these kind of situations where, and for me, it was music and being on stage. There is nothing more exhilarating and stressful and difficult than getting up and performing music with, you know, 5 people, and it's nothing comes close to that. So when you're in a situation where you've reached a point that I think a lot of people would love to get to in life, I mean, including myself, new challenges arise. And it's like the epitome of first world problems, right? But it's still a subjective problem to be at because you're not at peace. And I think that a lot of people derive more enjoyment from building the castle than actually sitting at the top of the castle. They go like, oh, the destination is what I'm aiming for. And then you get to the destination and you go, I actually kind of liked the journey because that gave me something productive to do. So for me personally, like I've chosen to live a very hermit, reclusive life. My parents call me a hermit. I live in a very small town. I won't say where it is, but I live in a very small town in a country that I've deliberately chosen to live in that predominantly doesn't speak English. I live on the edge of a national park, and I don't really interact with anyone in the day except my wife and my dog. I mean, I interact with people like yourself and friends and online and stuff, but in my personal life, we live very isolated. I walk in nature. I have a little gym set up at home. I've got a sauna set up. We've got a lake. I spend all my time in nature. And I got to a point through doing a lot of therapy with psychedelics, namely ayahuasca, where I realized that in my life, because I went through such a difficult, horrifically, I wouldn't say it was an acutely traumatic period because it was drawn out over multiple years, but because I went through something that was so difficult that brought me to my knees for a long period of time, and that I was able to struggle and rebuild from that, I've been through my chapter of stress in life that for me now, in terms of what I'm seeking peace. And for me, I consciously made a decision to go, I'm at a point that I could live in Australia, I could live here. I mean, I wouldn't say I could live anywhere, but I could choose where I live because I work remotely. And I chose to live separately from everyone I know and everyone I've met and all my creature comforts and all the things that I would enjoy doing for fun, because I want peace. And I want peace because I had the peace taken away from me for so long that now it's something that I'm grateful for. But I've been through enough stress and challenge in my life that, small stresses like, giving a speech or doing a podcast or something like that, like that's cool. But I don't need a big challenge anymore. I've done that. So if someone's in a situation where they've got all this stuff and they're not finding peace in not having more challenges and stress, then the solution is to find more challenges and stress. And if you're in a situation where you're like, well, I could financially program in adversity in whatever form that I wanted to do in a safe and productive environment, I think that the things like, starting a podcast and giving it up and doing these things and giving it up, it's because the only excitement in them is when they're novel. Once you work out how to do it, then you're like, well, now the novelty's gone and I've kind of, it's not a challenge, now it's boring.
So true.
Yeah. And I can completely relate to that. Like back when I used to play video games, like I don't think I finished that many of them because I was like, now that I've kind of gotten good at this, it's kind of boring. So I would be looking at going, what can you do? Like what kind of challenge can you set yourself that you overcome? And whether it's like, I would never recommend people do like a professional fight or something like that, but like,
I was thinking that, by the way.
great way to get a brain injury like me and ruin your life. But like our mutual friend back in Perth, Paz, I mean, he did a boxing fight. That was his kind of thing that he wanted to do. And I told him not to, but he did it and he's fine. So it's okay. But they're the kind of things that I think people in your situation can and should do, is find physically challenging masculine endeavors that you can put your time, effort, and energy into to be like, I am going to conquer something that I thought I couldn't do. Like the thing that I wanted to do when I first moved to Lithuania, which I couldn't do because of COVID, but I wanted to walk the Camino. So I wanted to do the Christian pilgrimage through Spain, which is like, it seemed like a much nicer version of walking the Bibbulmun track in Australia. Like I'd rather see Europe than spiders and snakes and shit. But I was like, there's no like, and the guy who was doing the tattoo I have on my arm here, it was a stick and poke project, so it took a month, and we spoke a lot during that month because there's not a lot else to do. We were out in the jungle, and he'd just gotten back from that, and he said it was the most defining thing in his life because you're physically challenging yourself, but it's like you're walking like 6-7 hours a day, so it's not brutal, but it's long. So, you have to think a lot. There's a lot of introspection. You meet people, you go on this journey, and objectively, when you come back from the journey, you are going to be a different person because of the experience that you've had. So the ultimate solution to boredom, in my experience, is productive stress. So it would be finding challenges that you can overcome, that you can do, that you would be proud of the person who would do something like that, and then go out and do it. And I think that that's and once you've done enough of that stuff, then you'll find peace in the boredom.
And is that something that you think is a constant state of peace after that, or you have to kind of find the next productive stress? Is it kind of like a cycle? Because I did the same as you. I moved away from Australia for that peace.
Yep.
Like there was just so much going on in Australia, especially with my friends, gangs and that. And it wasn't that there was any fear. I was just like, man, I'm such a different person now. I'm over this.
Yeah.
So I left, but one good thing happened. I got the peace, and I was already bored at home anyway, because my friends that were in Perth, they're all busy. Yeah. They're all business owners. They're all go-getters, Yeah. So I never got a chance to see them, even living in the same city.
Yeah.
I went and visited last year to Perth.
Yeah.
I couldn't see anyone. Everyone was busy.
Yeah.
They're doing their own thing. They're not going to take time out of their super busy day for me.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't even matter. Even if I move back home to hang out with the bros, they're at capacity.
Yeah.
So the only thing for me left, I do agree. I think it's something physical, because with the podcast, it was, like you said, it was novel. I set it up. But then because there's no monetary incentive, I've got no formula. So I'm not going to optimize the thumbnail. I'm not going to cold call all these guests because I don't need to.
Yeah.
And that in a way, without that need, that is why it fails on the algorithm too.
Yeah.
And I noticed that there was this period where I was doing them every week and it was like 5,000, 6,000, 10,000 views. As soon as I dropped off, YouTube just goes, hey mate, you're not consistent. Fuck off.
Yeah.
Like it does that, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a podcaster, bro.
Yeah.
You know, I'll do them here and there.
Yeah.
But I'm not that into it.
Yeah.
You know?
And I haven't started a podcast for the same reason. Like if I started a big podcast and got a big platform with it, I'd be like, I don't want to be a podcaster, because whereas I've met other people who like, and I've spoken to them and they're like, my number one goal is to be a YouTuber. And I'm like, I'd rather do a lot of other things than that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and good for you if that makes you happy, but that would make me miserable. I wouldn't want to do it. But you know, there are some people who really want to be famous and recognized and popular and stuff. I generally want to make a difference in the world, but also be left alone at the same time. And you know, people are just driven by different things, and what works for some people don't work for other people. But for, you know, maybe my opinion will change when I get older, because I'm only 32 and I don't really know shit about the, you know, the future of what my life's going to look like. But I think that, well, at least all I can speak of from my own experience is that if you go through enough stuff, then it kind of puts you at a state of peace. And I've seen people who never reach that point and they never retire, and they work themselves into the ground until the end, and then they realize they never took the time to smell the flowers because they hadn't mastered the thing that they wanted to master. And I think ultimately the stages that we work through in life as men is that you have to master something. Well, you don't have to, but you should at least try. And to be successful, both externally and internally in this world, but also as a spiritual being, you have to have mastered something. And I think that whatever you master is just the avenue or the focus point for mastering self. Because to master anything, you have to, unless you get lucky, to master anything, you have to have discipline, you have to have work ethic, you have to have delayed gratification, like all these different things. So whatever you master is really just the channel that you've mastered yourself and then manifested the outcome of that. So I think that the goal should be achieving self-mastery. And then once you achieve self-mastery, then the goal, if you are so inclined, is to have children, which you know you've done, which is fantastic. I'm looking forward to meeting them later today. Is that you can then teach that to your children. And I'm like, I think that's what everyone else did before us. And I'm like, I don't know what the meaning of life is, and I don't think I'll ever work that out. But I think following the pattern of everyone who came before us is a pretty good guide, because we don't really have anything else. So I think that what most, and this is why I'm so passionate about testosterone replacement therapy, because TRT doesn't just give you self-mastery, but optimal testosterone levels is a pretty damn important foundation for mastering anything, because of what it takes to do that. So I think heading down a path of mastering self is really important. And I think that if there's excess boredom, there is a lack of productive stress applied into meaningful things. And I think that if you've already achieved comfort financially and you're not someone who's really wanting to be a YouTuber, then that would be the most superfluous waste of time.
Yeah.
And it would be like, I have a degree in digital marketing and I am not a YouTuber, I'm not big on social media, not because I don't know how to do it, because I don't want to do it, because I hate it. So I think it's finding something productive and stressful that's got that nice balance, that if you got out the other side of it, you'd be like, that would be meaningful. Like that would mean something.
Yeah. And I look at you've got that. I don't have that thing outside of family that's meaningful,
Right.
You know? And I feel like when I look at people like yourself or others that seem fulfilled, at least how I perceive them, your Hubermans or Joe Rogan, they've got either this hobby or they're famous for something other than the car or the watch. You know what I mean? And that's something that I've noticed across the board, because, you know, if someone said to me, Daniel, you're going to be famous for curing this one thing, I'd be like, I think I can sit well with that.
Right.
But if someone goes, you're going to be famous because you bought all these, you know, things, Lambo, watch, everything, you marketed it, you followed the formula on YouTube and you got famous, I think, no.
Yeah, definitely. My wife measures the success of my career by how many babies I've helped make, not how much money I've made.
Nice metric, man. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. And I was very privileged to grow up in, you know, what we call the Golden Triangle in Perth.
Yep.
And one of the one of the things that I often see happen with that is that people don't have the drive to make money because they've always had it. And I've never had the drive to make money either, which again, that's one of the, I was, the level of blessing that I had in terms of being born into this vessel with my parents and how they brought me up. I mean, in hindsight, I had the best childhood ever, which I'm not bragging about it. I'm very grateful for it. And I'm very aware of it. Is that my parents were both working. So my mom and my dad worked equally hard, in terms of their careers. And I was primarily raised by my mother in a lot of ways. She spent more time with me. And she worked in the not-for-profit sector. And she always measured the success of her career by what she had achieved in terms of the impact that her work had had on like domestic violence victims and Indigenous Australians. So if I call her, because we speak on the phone all the time, I probably speak to my mum probably for like an hour a week, sometimes more on the phone, is if I tell her I made this much money or I got this many views on a video, she's happy for me. But if I go, hey, like I helped with, this many clients had babies this week, or I solved these problems for this client and he was at this point and now he's at this point, and like the impact on people's lives, that's the stuff that she's really proud of. And so for me, like in terms of how we're conditioned and how we're programmed, like I was always programmed to be like, make the difference and do the right thing in the world, and then the finances will come from that in a way that is proportionate to the impact that you're having in the world. And I think that people focus too much on making the money, whereas what I've focused on is being like, do the good thing, and then the compensation will be applied for that. And the way that I look at purpose is that my overarching purpose is to make the world a better place because I was in it, and leave the world a better place when I found it. And I feel like that if I die tomorrow, which would suck, I feel like I've done that. Like I'm good. So I'm not going to like retire tomorrow, but like because of the lives that I've impacted and the good that I've done, and also like the knowledge that I've left behind, which is why I've wanted to write the books and put the content on YouTube, which I know it'll probably get lost in the noise in the future, but I also know it's there for the people who will find it and look for it. I'm like, I'm good. Like I'm good with where I'm at. And I've written one more book, which is coming out soon. It's just getting edited at the moment. And then I'm doing some masterclasses this year. And once I kind of finish up that section of creating professional, I don't want to say content because that sounds like vlogs, but like when I've made these educational materials, I feel like through the work that I've done with, like your child and other people's kids as well, in terms of helping with fertility, I'm like, I'm good. As long as I'm nice to people and have good values and look after my wife and behave in a way that someone with good morals should do, I'm like, I feel like I've achieved that purpose. And that helps me sleep more than melatonin does, CBD, magnesium, anything else, is that when I lay down at the end of the day, I'm like, what I did, I'm tired because I applied myself to the maximum capacity that I could. And what I did with that capacity had a positive impact on the world. And it's like, when you do that, it's hard to be depressed and anxious.
Definitely. Yeah, well, that's compelling. So I guess what I take from that is you're in the Wikipedia files now. So what I mean by that is Dave Lee is in there as an inventor of something that someone hadn't done before. You've kind of put your brick in the road. And I would say, I mean, there's various things you've done, but for me, I know Australia specific, within Australia, you changed the course of the way that struggling men in Australia got very needed scripts, because you were you were a solution to a problem that needed to be fixed. I mean, no one here that's not Australian doesn't understand how difficult it was until you came across Dave Lee.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two is that there were obviously doctors doing it before. It's just they weren't helpful. So you not only got the script and helped.
Yeah. That was a big thing that I felt driven to, because when I was going through my rehabilitation for my brain injury, if it wasn't for the testosterone, I wouldn't have gotten through it, because that was just this insurmountable, horrific period of what I would call living hell. And testosterone didn't make it less hell, but it kind of gave me like a sword that I could pick up to fight back. And that allowed me to progress with intensity and resilience that I didn't ever think that I would be capable of. And that was a really cool thing to be able to do, because when I got through it, I was like, I'm the guy who got through that. And like, when I tell my story of what I went through in that, it still doesn't seem real that I actually did that. And for people who've been through traumatic events and periods of your life, your memory kind of blocks out a lot of it to kind of,
Does.
yeah, it's patchy. But the stuff that I do remember is something that I would like when I was doing the rehab that I was doing. And for those who don't know, I had very severe vestibular neuritis. So it was like if we spun around on those stools over there 50 times, and it was like that for years. So, I went from running this digital marketing thing I was doing before. I was in a band, really enjoying my life. Fast forward 2 years, every doctor told me at first that it would go back to normal. It didn't. And then when they eventually diagnosed the nerve issue, they said that the damage is too severe. This is never going to get better. And multiple, many nights of inconsolable crying with my mum sitting on the end of my bed. Later, I basically realized that I was in a situation where I couldn't continue with the way that I was feeling, but I didn't have the balls to kill myself. And I was like, there's only one way out of that, which is that you have to fix the problem, because both of them were not consequences that I literally couldn't do either of them. Maybe if I'd had a gun, pulling the trigger would have been doable, but taking your life without an automatic weapon is not an easy thing to do.
Yep. It's not.
No. So when I was at that point, it was probably 8 to 10 hours a day once I eventually found a vestibular rehab specialist. Her name was Kate at the Perth Dizziness Balance Clinic. When I went to see her, she was like, you might be able to create some compensation if you work really hard on this, that you can live a functional life. And I was like, if I can just get to the point that I can not be a financial burden on my mom, then that's okay. So, I'm like, I have an undergrad degree in marketing. I can get like a, $50K a year office job. If I can, learn to be able to read a screen properly again, I'm like, cool. Like I'll fight to do that. And to be very, very honest, and I've said this a couple of times before, is that I didn't think I was going to get better. I just wanted to leave a story that when I did eventually off myself, that at least at my funeral, people respected my memory, to be like, that dude went down swinging. That's all I wanted. And then there was a point where I went to I did a very strong macro dose of psilocybin mushrooms in a therapeutic context. So legal country in Europe, guided therapy session with what would be deemed a heroic dose of psilocybin. And on the way to the ceremony on the flight, I couldn't watch movies properly, but because the plane screen was so small, I could, because I didn't have to move my eyes very far. So I'm like, I can watch movies. I've been really wanting to watch Skyscraper with Dwayne Johnson in it. Mm-hmm. And I love those old Dwayne Johnson movies because he's basically like a pseudo superhero because he's like a big black Samoan. I'm like, it's just, they're all the same, but I love him. And I was watching this movie and, it didn't, when you use psychedelics, one thing I learned down the line is that your set and setting is really important, and we often talk about the diet, but there's also the diet of what you consume impacts, your experience. So because I watched that movie the day before, it was very fresh in my unconscious, and there was this point where I kind of rose out of my body and I looked down at myself, and it was, I was communicating with what people would call like the higher consciousness, and the only message I had for myself was that if you call it quits now, Dwayne Johnson would never play you in a movie. And I was like, that stung. And I just started testosterone like a couple of weeks before that, and that having the someone say you can do this with some rehab, you might be able to get your life back, and then to have that kind of tough love for myself, and then I came back and I was like, I'm gonna do this. And I remember listening to the first David Goggins podcast on Joe Rogan, where he basically tells like the summary version of his book. I probably listened to that podcast 100, 200 times. Just, I would go down to one of the ovals in Perth, like the football ovals, and I would do the rehab exercises that I was meant to do for half an hour a day for 8 hours. I would just do them over and over and over again. And it progressed from like, you would focus on a dot on the wall and just like look, like you maintain your eye contact. And then there was like another one that I had to do at home, which is like you're in a corridor and you have to walk in a straight line, moving your head. And eventually over many months, it progressed to like, running backwards or like running forward with your eyes closed and doing a 360 spin. And I would be vomiting multiple times from the dizziness and falling over all the time. And I would just be like, a lot of the time I'd just play the Rocky music just over and over again. And just, I would just put myself into this like masochistic trance of being like, there's no other path forward. I want to be the guy who did this. And I was such a little bitch before that. Like, I mean, I was the opposite of anyone who would have anything close to those traits, like that could even have been possible. Like I even telling it now, it doesn't really seem like I would have been the person who could have done that. But when you're in a state of desperation and there's no other choice, that's what I had to do. And if it wasn't for the testosterone, I wouldn't have, one, wanted to do it, to even try, but two, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And when something like that had such a profound impact that when I got out the other end, because at the end of it, I went back to university, I did a diploma in science once I could kind of read a little bit better. Wanted to do a master's in neuropsychiatry, but dropped out of that because it was all bullshit. But I learned that I was like, hang on, this hormone is actually really important for the brain. What about things like pregnenolone, DHEA, melatonin? And then I got into peptides. So I used BPC back in like 2016 when it was 2017, when it was very novel. And I just basically one day at the end of this rehab process, I was like, I'm just going to do a Hail Mary. I'm just going to get every possible supplement that is good for the brain. I'm going to stack them all together. I'm going to stack it with the BPC. I'm going to do everything all at once. And I'm going to go as much in on this rehab as possible while using this peptide and see how far I can get. And I got to this point. I was at a friend's, because things had gradually gotten better over this point, not to the point that it was amazing, but gotten better. And I went to a friend's property who was on an orchard. And I remember we went through a walk through the orchard and someone called out and I looked over my shoulder and I realized that I wasn't off balance. And I realized I hadn't been off balance for a few weeks or maybe a month. And I was like, I think I just burst out crying. I was like, this is like, it's over. It's done. And after that point, I was working like 3 days a week for a not-for-profit minimum wage job, just being able to fuel my car. I was still living with my mom and, just going to the gym twice a day, doing the rehab and kind of gotten out of the tail end. And I was like, this helping guys with TRT who are going through their version of this hell period in their life, this is like the only thing that matters. Like everything else is just a fucking waste of time. So I started doing it on the side while I was still working. And then eventually it transitioned into my calendar was booked out and I was like, I'm going to do this full time and took the plunge on it. And I've just been helping with all I've done over the last 5 years is done consults to help guys with their TRT. And then if someone sent me an email and gave me an opportunity, I just said yes. And then I worked out how I could make it work later, which included like all-nighters and weekends and whatever. I just said yes to every opportunity that popped up in my inbox. And I helped everyone that I possibly could. And then I just did that for us up until this point.
Yeah, man. So for you with this, we'll call it a trauma.
Yep.
I still don't really know how to define that word, a trauma. And I think about it myself. I'm not really comfortable talking about things on camera from my past. Not that like I'm insecure about it. It's just coming from this commando approach. It's got to be something from my father and his father's father, We just don't talk about things.
Yeah.
It's just like how it is. But I'm lucky in the sense that I have a terrible memory. Like I've been told by friends, bro, how can you not remember that? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's the drugs. That's been a blessing for me because I can sort of remember these traumas, but I don't feel them.
Yeah.
I see a lot of guys that talk about things that have happened 5-10 years ago. I would even argue less severe than what happened to me, but they are still hyper emotional about it. Now, how much of that, this is the question, has got to do with the fact that they may have low testosterone levels? Some of these males in question, I know they do because obviously living in this modern environment, quite a lot of people, even more than 50% do these days, right? How much of that has got to do with the fact that I had always had optimized testosterone levels? So I've always got this ambition, I'll beat it mindset, just naturally without having to amp myself up. How much of that can be helped for these men by just simply optimizing testosterone levels? If they did nothing else at all, they just optimized testosterone levels, how much of an impact will that have on their behavior?
A big impact. This is the whole nature versus nurture thing in a different context. And I think there's a few layers to it. I think that the challenge is that if you've had low testosterone during your formative years and then you correct it, then you have to relearn a lot of stuff. And that's why I often say to guys that it takes, TRT takes time to work, but it also takes time to do the work. And you have to basically recreate yourself through habits and action and programmed adversity and giving it time to change who you are. And I just go, look, puberty took about 5 years to do that, so it's probably about the same. And that tends to be the timeline. But I also think that, and this is again the nature versus nurture thing, because your biology impacts your actions to some degree. It changes your disposition towards things. TRT doesn't make you want to go to the gym. It doesn't take you to the gym, but it makes you more inclined to go if you understand, because you actually want to now train and move and so on and so forth, because you now have this physiological energy that you're basically wanting to push your body. So when it comes to growing up with more optimal testosterone levels and having optimal testosterone levels for a prolonged period, you're probably more likely to take actions and do things that involve you becoming exposed to some degree of stress. Whereas people who are low testosterone tend to, by default, gravitate more towards avoidant behaviors. And this is because testosterone is an internal biological buffer towards stress. So DHT in particular, and testosterone as well, has an internal antagonistic action with cortisol at the receptor level. So if you have something that increases dopamine transmission and reduces cortisol activation, you're basically going to be in situations where stresses don't feel as paralyzing and debilitating, and there's more reward that comes from taking risks. Now, this can also lead people down bad paths, because it can make you more predisposed to doing stupid, reckless shit and getting hurt or getting into gambling and drugs and everything else.
That's for sure.
Yeah. But you can also, and that's why sometimes it's a blessing that we optimize testosterone levels once emotional maturity is set in, which is also good. But the challenge with going through like a trauma, if we're going to use the T word, is that the brain perceives stress subjectively. So if someone's never been through anything remotely difficult, and then they go through something like, I don't know, year 12 TE exams at the end of high school, that could induce PTSD in someone who's a complete snowflake, because they've never been through anything remotely difficult, and now they've got high parental expectations or high self expectations, and people have had fucking meltdowns when I was in school over that.
I remember.
Yeah. And it's because that's the most difficult thing they'd ever gone through. So internally, that stress response would be the same as if, multiple guys with axes came in and tried to kill us now. Like, it would be the same internal cascade of stress, because the baseline for what is stressful and what is easy is subjective. And that's why I think it's so important that people go through some kind of rite of passage. And I hadn't been through a rite of passage before, and then I got hit with like the Godzilla of them, which was very difficult, but it also, I'm grateful that I came out the other side. But it's when it also comes to stress, and I can speak about PTSD because I went through something that was so stressful. I believe that when we're looking at PTSD, it's because the trauma hasn't been integrated properly. So if people go through something really difficult and really challenging, and then they don't integrate it positively into learning from it or growing from it or understanding it, then it can really eat away at them and build up over time and become something that completely derails and destroys their entire life, because they haven't moved on from it. And I think the only way that you can move on from a trauma is find a way to integrate it, that you can grow from it, you can learn from it, you can have it serve you. And that can be really difficult when it's something horrific and it's something acute and it's something that you're like a victim of, a random act of violence or something like that. But one of the things that we used to talk about at the gym I used to work at, and this was right after I finished university, my first job was at a terrible gym in Perth. And we did like some very beginner level martial arts classes, like boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, BJJ. And one thing that the instructor spoke to me about, who was a fantastic instructor, and I was like, because I was doing sales in the gym, and I was like, who should I recommend what class for? I didn't know anything about martial arts, never watched an MMA fight, didn't know anything about any of this. And he was like, recommend that the women do BJJ. And I was like, why? And he's like, a lot of women in Perth have unfortunately been sexually assaulted to some degree, whether it's a situation that they didn't really want to be in and went along with, or full-blown sexual assault. And he goes, there is nothing more beneficial for a woman who has been sexually assaulted than to learn how to absolutely fucking murder someone who is bigger than them, heavier than them, and on top of them. And he's like, this is the ultimate subjective experiential therapy for people who've been through a trauma where they felt physically violated by someone bigger than them, because they're getting back into that compromised position and they're learning how to strategically take action and become dominant in that position. And I was like, that makes sense.
And a chick, by the way, I have some knowledge. A chick that's good at BJJ, well, if she gets me in the wrong position, like I'm
you're
done.
done. Yeah.
Done. Like there's no chance. Like a 50-kilo chick who's really good at BJJ, if I'm not careful about keeping my distance, because I'm not at that level, like finished.
Yep. And I don't understand much about BJJ, but I understand that in the right position, it's actually an advantage to be smaller and lighter.
Certain positions, yeah. If they know how to use their nimbleness, then yeah, it is an advantage. That's right.
Yeah. So I think if you can extrapolate out that example to other contexts in terms of if you've been through something difficult, if you can find a way to get back into a situation that you might find triggering or you might find uncomfortable, and then learn to master that situation, not just become okay at it, but be able to master it, I think that's where the growth is.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess when you touched on martial arts, a couple more questions before we go. One of the good things or the positive things I take from that whole gang life interaction is that they really normalize a lot of the stuff people would find traumatic.
Yep.
So for me, even now, even though I stepped away from that, when I hear about something violent, I honestly just intrinsically and intuitively just go, so what, bro?
Yep.
Like, big fucking deal.
Yep.
You got your head kicked in. It happens to all of us at some point. That's how I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have traumas from any of that stuff, bro, because to me, that's just life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I call it life. But I do see in certain people that have grown up in different cliques, they aren't stress inoculated to a lot of this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm grateful for that. But that doesn't make it any better just because I don't have stress from that. If for me, I get health anxiety.
Yeah.
You know, if I see my blood pressure too high, I'm stressing more than if we're about to scrap.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So everyone's got their thing. I guess before we wrap it up, all right, which I've taken a lot, it's always a bit of a therapy session with Dave. Do you know what I mean? He's a well-rounded dude. He's I don't know, I don't even know what the title would be. Like it's this, I think it's a health coach, male health coach, but also wisdom beyond the years. You know, very similar to the beard. I think the beard, it suits the personality well, you know. How would you wrap up this chat then? Let's talk about the demographic probably watching this. Dudes, 18 to 50. Any last words?
So when this is how I've finished a lot of my talks. I have a series called Your Brain on Testosterone and the War on Masculinity on YouTube. And if anyone's seen that, you'd see me say the same thing at the end. But the most important thing that we can do is to logically work out how to take action from how to get from where we are to where we want to be. And that's easier said than done when you're like, I want to be more masculine, or I want to be a better man, or I want to find purpose, or I want to live a life that I wake up and look forward to living. Like that's not an easy A to B to get to. You know, if you said, hey, I want to put 40 kilos on my bench, okay, cool, progressive overload, work out a plan, easy. So back when I was doing digital marketing again, we had this concept that I was taught called reverse engineering, which is basically you find the end goal of what you want, and then rather than working towards it, you work backwards. And that sometimes is easier because sometimes going from here to here doesn't make any sense, but going from here to here makes a lot of sense. And then if you've gone from here to here, sometimes it makes more sense to go from here to here. So there's multiple ways you can work out how to fill in this gap. But if you want to get up the cliff and you're down here, you have to work out how you can make steps to get up. And the easiest way to get up from here to here is to make the smallest possible steps. That's much easier than making kind of big climbs to big rapid steps. So there's two ways that I would look at reverse engineering this. And what I often do is I do this exercise where I visualize, and this is where manifestation actually becomes tangible and real. This is like real manifestation, which is when you visualize and you go, what is the version of myself who I would consider the best version of myself, which gets thrown around a lot, but the version of me that I would respect and the version of me that I would wake up as and look forward to my day, or at least just not hate the life that I'm living. What does that guy look like? How does he live? How does he dress? What's his morning routine? What time does he get up? What time does he eat? How does he take care of himself? How does he speak to other people? How does he speak to his girlfriend? All that kind of stuff. If you can visualize what that best version of you is, or the version of you that you would respect, and it's probably an amalgamation of 3 to 5 people that you look up to, combined with traits about yourself, and you make this ideal persona or construction of who you would like to be. And what you do is you start to adopt small traits or small habits or small actionable things that he does that you don't do, or you stop doing the shit that you do that he doesn't do. And you gradually, over time, strategically, so you work out periods that you could do this, and you work out, well, what's the lowest hanging fruit, or what's got the highest ROI, or what's got the lowest barrier to entry that I could do. So maybe, and the one that I recommend people start with, which is the easiest thing to do, people massively underestimate it, is just go to bed and get up at the same time every day. Like, just do that. It doesn't have to be 4 a.m. Just go to bed and get up at the same time. Have a bedtime. Having a bedtime, there's a reason why parents give kids bedtimes. It's so important. So give yourself a fucking bedtime, and then you'll be able to create structure for everything else to take place. So that's what I would start with. And then the other things that I like to talk about, which was kind of like the Camino, for example, is look at things that you can do where if you achieved or overcame it, you would be a different person if you came out the other side. And one of the things that I really advocate guys do, because it made a huge difference in my life, and I wish I could continue doing it, but with my injuries, I can't. But when I moved to Lithuania, I said to my wife, I want to learn Muay Thai. And she was like, why do you want to learn Muay Thai? And I'm like, well, because of my balance issues, if I can learn to kick, then that's putting me in this situation where I have to learn how to balance without thinking about balancing. And that's like the last stage of rehab. That's like the ultimate stage of rehab. And I can't learn to surf in Lithuania because it's landlocked. Well, it's not landlocked, but the Baltic Sea doesn't really work for surfing. So anyway, she gave me the details of this Muay Thai gym, and I just rolled in, and I had never done a day of any martial arts in my life. And I was like a fish out of water. And I am still the worst Muay Thai fighter of all time. I'm like at the 4-week level after like multiple years, because I can't balance. My hips are fucked. My back's fucked. I will never get any good at Muay Thai, but I still went every week for a good period, maybe the whole time I was living in Lithuania twice, so maybe like a year to 18 months probably. I went every week for a year, and I sucked every single time I went. And I had a fantastic coach. His name's Don. He's going to watch this. And that for me was so valuable because I went and did something that I absolutely sucked at. I was in a supportive, nurturing environment where someone was teaching me combat and physical violence in a safe capacity, and in a situation where I could become very overloaded with stress because they're simulating violence. You're still working with pads, but your brain doesn't really understand what's going on because it's a whole new environment. And you're physically exerting. I mean, with the amount of balance and back issues I had, I would just be sweating buckets. And if you can go and push yourself and do something like that just for the sake of doing it, like I'd never want to have a Muay Thai fight. I'm never going to get good at it. But just going and doing that thing every week, that was the hardest thing of my week. So when I would wake up in the morning and be stressed about how many emails I had to answer, or stressed by how big my day was going to be, or all these things, that's nothing compared to the Muay Thai I was doing every week. So having something like that you build into your week that's like, this is so much harder than everything else, it will make everything else seem easier. And that's the whole point of it, just going and doing that. And if you can go, well, every week for the next 8 or 12 weeks, just set yourself a challenge. I'm going to go and do that. At the end of that period, regardless of what happens during those 12 hours over that 12 weeks, you will be a different person when you come out at the end of it, because it will change you in some way. The person who finishes that will be different than the person who hadn't done that. And that growth will be valuable from getting from here to here. So I think looking at things that you can do to go, I might not understand how or why or what the benefit from this will be, but I know it will be good for me. And I'm just going to apply and do the same things. And if you can go, okay, well, maybe if I learn to cook my own dinner every night and eat food that's healthy that I make for myself, maybe if I start doing that over time, that will really serve me. Or the other one I like guys to do to juxtapose the martial arts is maybe if I practice mindfulness for 10 minutes every day and I sit down with my brain and look at all the dark parts of my brain that I don't like and just sit down and look at it, and still with all of that shit swirling around and all these negative thoughts, if I can still find peace and stillness in that, maybe if I'm the guy who's practiced that every day for a long period of time, 6 months down the line, I'll be able to make better decisions. I'll be able to have better conversations when I'm stressed. I'll be able to navigate emotional conflicts with my partner better so that I can actually get the outcome that we're both trying to achieve. And if you can program in and go, okay, I don't know how to get from here to here, but maybe if I start doing these things regularly, they will ultimately lead me to being more like that guy who I want to be like, who's just basically the metamorphosized version of you. You can do shit like that and do it strategically and stick to it and not show it off on social media or so that you can tell your friends, but just do it for you. I think that's worthwhile.
Man, great answer. As we end this podcast, I just want to tell everyone, listen to Dave. I think it's a far better way or a better influencer / role model to look to rather than the other male influencers, which I see are more putting men down to the point they feel so bad to do something. I'm not really about that approach. I can say for sure, just looking at my own life, thinking about how I've tried to help relatives or friends with that kind of commando approach. That mean approach, it didn't work out as much as I thought it would. The whole just like, stop being a pussy, bro, just harden up. The reason is also because that's such a kind of weasel word or weasel phrase where what does harden up? What does not be a pussy mean? Whereas you put it in this nice, kind framework of things to do, a step-by-step framework. And it's obviously helping people. Whereas the way that I was going about doing it, it just wasn't helping. It was just making me feel guilty and the other people pissed off at me.
Yep.
So I have to say in the last 2 years, I wouldn't say I've gotten softer. It's just that I'm conscientious that my approach wasn't necessarily productive, and I much prefer to learn from people like you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Welcome, man. All right. I think that wraps it up. That was a good chat.
Perfect, man. Thank you very much. I think when it comes to testosterone, you want to get the optimal benefits of testosterone, and testosterone will continue to become more optimal for you until you take too much. There's not a lot that's changed in injectable dosing for testosterone in the last few years.
All right, so let's say now somebody starts testosterone. I want to get your take on optimal frequency of shots, dosing, CYP versus enanthate or whatever. It seems like universally